I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Karen Miller, and for most of my early life, I was just a girl from the wrong side of town who believed in the American dream. I grew up watching my parents work themselves to the bone for little reward, and I promised myself my life would be different. I'd build something meaningful, something lasting. When I met John Miller at a friend's barbecue in the summer of 1985, I thought fate had finally smiled on me. He was handsome, confident, and came from a family that seemed to have everything mine didn't: stability, connections, and a successful trucking business that had been in the family for 2 generations. "You're different," John told me on our third date, as we sat in his car overlooking the city lights. "Most women I meet want to talk about my family's business right away, but you haven't even asked," I laughed, tucking my hair behind my ear. "Maybe I'm more interested in you than your family's trucks." What I didn't tell him was how intimidated I felt by his background. The Millers weren't just middle class, they were respectable, established. His father had built Miller Transport from a single truck into a fleet of 30. His mother, Martha, was active in the country club and local charities. And there I was, a girl whose father worked at the steel mill and whose mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Despite the differences in our backgrounds, John and I fell deeply in love. When he proposed 6 months later, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small, my choice, though Martha pushed for something more elaborate, and we moved into our first home, a modest starter house on the edge of a good neighborhood. "This is just temporary," John promised as we carried boxes inside. "In 5 years, we'll be in that neighborhood." He pointed toward in the hills where the executive homes stood like sentinels over the city. I believed him. I believed in us. The first signs of trouble came during our wedding reception. Martha Miller, elegant in her powder blue dress and pearl necklace, cornered me by the bathroom. "John could have had anyone," she said, her smile thin as paper. "I hope you appreciate what you're marrying into." I remember smiling back, determined to be gracious. "I appreciate John for who he is. Mrs. Miller, the business is wonderful, but it's your son I fell in love with." Her eyes hardened slightly. "Of course, dear. Just remember, the Miller name means something in this town. We have standards to uphold." Those words followed me through the early years of our marriage. Martha never missed an opportunity to remind me of my outsider status. Sunday dinners at this Miller home became exercises in restraint, with Martha questioning my cooking. "You don't use fresh herbs." My homemaking. "Oh, you buy ready-made curtains." And eventually, my parenting. When Ryan was born in 1991, our world shifted in the most beautiful way. He had John's strong jaw and my eyes, and from the moment the nurse placed him in my arms, I knew I'd do anything to protect him. John was a proud father, bringing cigars to the office and showing off pictures to anyone who'd look. For a while, we were truly happy. I stopped working my receptionist job to stay home with Ryan, and though money was tighter, we managed. I poured every ounce of myself into motherhood. I stayed up through Ryan's fevers, read to him for hours, and made homemade baby food because the jars were too expensive. When he took his first steps across our living room carpet, both John and I cried with joy. But as Ryan grew, I noticed Martha's influence creeping in. She'd bring expensive gifts we couldn't afford, designer clothes for a toddler who preferred mud puddles, educational toys from catalogs when plastic blocks would have delighted him just as much. "He should have the best," she'd say if I objected. "Every Miller child does." John would shrug off my concerns. "Let Mom have her fun." It's not hurting anyone. But it was. It created expectations I couldn't meet. It placed a wedge between the life we could provide and the life Martha thought appropriate for a Miller. By the time Ryan was 4, the trucking company was facing its first serious challenges. Newer, larger logistics companies were undercutting Miller Transport's rates, and fuel costs were rising. John began bringing work home, spreading papers across our kitchen table after Ryan was in bed. "We'll weather this," he assured me, but the worry lines on his forehead deepened each month. I offered to return to work, but John refused. "A Miller wife does not have to work," he said, echoing his mother's values. "I'll handle this." I should have pushed harder. I should have seen what was coming. But I trusted my husband, and that trust would cost me everything. The cracks in our life together appeared slowly at first. John started coming home later, often bringing the scent of whiskey with him. Our conversations grew shorter, our laughter rarer. "It's just stress," he'd say when I asked if he was okay. "The business is going through a rough patch," but rough patch became our new normal. By 1996, when Ryan was 5, John had changed from the attentive husband and father I'd married to a man I barely recognized. He was irritable, defensive, and increasingly secretive about the company's finances. One night after Ryan was asleep, I found John in our home office, a glass of bourbon in hand as he stared at a stack of papers. "John," I said softly, "we need to talk about what's happening." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Nothing's happening that I can't handle." "Then why are you drinking every night? Why won't you talk to me anymore?" He took a long sip before answering. "You wouldn't understand. This is business." "I'm your wife," I said, my voice cracking. "Let me help. Maybe I could look at the books." "The books are fine," he snapped, slamming his glass down. The bourbon sloshed over the side, staining the papers beneath. "Damn it, Karen. Now look what you made me do." I stepped back, stung by his tone. But as he hurriedly wiped the spill, I caught sight of a bank statement with figures in red. A lot of red. "John, are we in trouble?" I asked quietly. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I thought he might finally confide in me. Instead, he gathered the papers and shoved them in a drawer. "Go to bed, Karen. I've got this under control." But he didn't. A week later, I was cleaning his office when I found loan documents hidden in his desk. Not bank loans, high-interest loans from names I didn't recognize. Worse, some of the documents had my signature on them, signatures I had never made. My hands trembled as I flipped through page after page. John had borrowed nearly $200,000 from what appeared to be private lenders, and he'd forged my name to secure the loans against our house, the house that was partially an inheritance from my grandmother. That night, I confronted him with the papers spread across our bed. "What the hell were you thinking?" I demanded. "You forged my signature. You put our home at risk." John's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally, a deflated resignation. "I had no choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad's company was failing before I took over. He hid it from everyone. The books were a mess. These loans are temporary just to keep us afloat until I can turn things around." "You should have told me," I said. "We're supposed to be partners." He laughed bitterly. "Partners, Karen. You don't know the first thing about running a business. Your father worked the assembly line. What could you possibly contribute?" His words cut deep, but I held my ground. "I could have stopped you from making illegal decisions that put our family at risk. What happens when these loans come due?" "I'm handling it," he insisted, but wouldn't meet my eyes. Over the next few months, I tried to understand the extent of our financial situation. John blocked me at every turn. He moved his paperwork to a locked cabinet at work. He opened a separate bank account. When I suggested we see a financial advisor together, he accused me of not trusting him. Meanwhile, Martha's behavior toward me grew increasingly hostile. Before, she'd been passively dismissive. Now, she became openly critical. At a family dinner, she remarked loudly, "It's a shame John has to work so hard while you stay at home doing... What exactly do you do all day, Karen?" When I mentioned I'd been thinking of looking for part-time work now that Ryan was in kindergarten, she scoffed. "A Miller wife doesn't need to work. Unless, of course, John isn't providing adequately." The dig was deliberate, designed to provoke a response. I saw John's jaw tighten, but he said nothing to defend me. Later, I overheard Martha talking to John's sister in the kitchen. "That girl is dragging him down," she said. "She's never understood our family's position. Now look, the business is struggling, and what does she contribute? Nothing. Just another mouth to feed." The words "wretched woman" began as a whispered nickname among the Millers. I first heard it from John's brother at a Christmas gathering when he thought I was out of earshot. "Here comes the wretched woman," he murmured to his wife as I entered the room carrying a tray of cookies I'd baked from scratch. The nickname spread. It became Martha's preferred way to refer to me when speaking to other family members. Never to my face, that would be too direct, too confrontable. Always just within earshot. Always dismissible as a misunderstanding if I called it out. I tried to shield Ryan from the growing tension, but children sense when something is wrong. He became quieter around his father, more clingy with me. At night, he'd sometimes climb into our bed, squeezing between us like he was trying to hold our family together through sheer physical force. "Why is Daddy always mad?" he asked me one afternoon as we walked home from his bus stop. "Daddy's just worried about work," I said, squeezing his small hand. "He loves us very much." Even as I said it, I wondered if it was still true, if John loved us enough to stop whatever dangerous financial game he was playing before it destroyed us all. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in March 1997. I was making breakfast when the phone rang. It was Diane from the bank, a woman I knew from my old job. "Karen," she said, her voice unusually formal. "I'm calling about the withdrawals from your joint savings account." "What withdrawals?" I asked, feeling a chill spread through my chest. "There have been several large withdrawals over the past 2 weeks. I thought you knew." I gripped the counter to steady myself. "How much?" "Almost all of it," she replied softly. "About 37,000. Karen, is everything okay?" I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. That account held Ryan's college fund and our emergency savings, money I'd contributed to from my inheritance and years of careful budgeting. When I confronted John that evening, his reaction terrified me. "You had no right to check up on me," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "That money is keeping us from bankruptcy." "It was our safety net," I cried. "Ryan's future." "There won't be a future if the business fails," he snarled. Then, seeing the horror on my face, his tone softened slightly. "Look, I'll pay it back, with interest, but I needed it for an opportunity that will save everything. Trust me on this." But I couldn't. Not anymore. The next day, while John was at work, I drove to his office. I had never used the key he'd given me for emergencies, but this qualified. I needed to see the books for myself. What I found was worse than I imagined. The company ledgers showed massive debt, far beyond what the business could support. There were irregular entries, payments to companies I'd never heard of, and what looked like 2 sets of books, one official, one not. As I photographed pages with shaking hands, the office door opened. It was Martha. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice like ice. I straightened, heart pounding. "Trying to understand what's happening to my family." Her laugh was cold. "Your family? The Millers have been building this legacy for generations before John made the mistake of bringing you into it." "John is forging documents and taking out illegal loans," I said. "He's emptied our savings. This isn't about legacy, it's about breaking the law." Something flickered in her eyes, fear. Perhaps, but it was quickly replaced by calculation. "You always were a liability," she said. "I told John from the beginning that you weren't Miller material. Now you prove it sneaking around, spying, ready to betray your husband at the first sign of trouble." "I'm trying to protect my son," I shot back. "And John, too, from whatever hole he's digging for himself." Martha stepped closer, her perfume cloying in the small office. "Listen carefully. Karen, you will go home. You will say nothing about this to anyone. The Millers handle their own problems, and we certainly don't need some trailer trash girl telling us how to run our affairs." I gathered the photographs I'd taken. "I won't let John destroy our future. Either he comes clean and we fix this together, or I'm taking these to an accountant." Her eyes narrowed. "You do that, and you'll regret it. Family stands together. Karen, even wretched women like you should understand that." I left with the evidence in my purse, unaware that I had just triggered a chain of events that would tear my life apart. That was the last normal day I would have for a very long time. 2 days later, they came for me. It was morning. I had just dropped Ryan off at kindergarten and returned home to clean up breakfast dishes. The knock at the door was firm, authoritative. 2 men in suits stood on my porch, flanked by a uniformed officer. "Karen Miller," one asked, showing a badge. "I'm Agent Peterson with the Financial Crimes Division. We have some questions about Miller Transport." My heart pounded as I led them to the living room. "What's this about?" "We're investigating financial irregularities," Agent Peterson said, his tone neutral, but his eyes assessing. "Specifically, funds that appear to have been diverted from business accounts for personal use, along with suspected tax fraud and misrepresentation to lenders." I took a deep breath. "I just discovered some of this myself. My husband, Mrs. Miller," the second agent interrupted. "We have evidence that you've been heavily involved in the company's financial operations. Documents with your signature appear throughout the irregular transactions." "Those aren't my signatures," I protested. "John forged them. I can prove it." Agent Peterson exchanged a glance with his colleague. "We'd like you to come downtown to answer some questions." "Of course," I said, relieved they were listening. "Let me just call my mother-in-law to pick up Ryan from school." "That won't be necessary," the agent said. "This might take a while." What followed was 7 hours of questioning in a sterile room that smelled of coffee and floor cleaner. I explained everything: the forged signatures, the hidden loans, the emptied savings account. I showed them the photos I'd taken of the books, pointing out inconsistencies. The agents listened, took notes, but their expressions remained unreadable. When I mentioned Martha's confrontation at the office, one of them frowned. "Mrs. Miller, Are you suggesting your mother-in-law was aware of these activities? She must have been, I said. The whole family works in the business. Just then, the door opened, and a new agent entered, whispering something to Peterson. His face hardened. Mrs. Miller, we've just executed a search warrant at your home, he said. Would you like to explain why we found $50,000 in cash hidden in the back of your closet, behind your clothes? The blood drained from my face. That's impossible. There's no money in my closet. We have photographs, he said, sliding a picture across the table. There it was, bound stacks of bills in a shoebox I'd never seen before, sitting on the floor of my closet. That's not mine, I said, my voice rising. Someone planted that. John or his family, they're setting me up. But I could see in their eyes they didn't believe me. Why would they? The desperate housewife claiming conspiracy was a cliché as old as time. What I didn't know then was that while I sat in that interrogation room, John was building a wall between me and freedom. He told investigators I had handled the company's books for years. He provided emails later proven to be backdated, showing me giving instructions about financial matters. He claimed the irregular transfers were my idea, to fund a secret gambling addiction. Most devastatingly, he told them I had threatened to take Ryan and disappear with the company's money if he ever exposed me. By evening, I was no longer answering questions. I was being charged with multiple felonies: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and money laundering. As they processed my arrest, I kept asking, "What about Ryan, please? My son needs me. He's only 6. Your husband has been notified," an officer told me. "He's arranging care for your son." The thought of Ryan coming home to find me gone was unbearable. "Please," I begged, "let me at least call and tell him I love him." They denied my request. Policy, they said. The night in holding was a blur of fluorescent lights, hard benches, and the smell of despair. I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, about what John had done, about how quickly my life had unraveled. The next morning, I was led into court for arraignment, and there, sitting in the gallery, was the entire Miller family: John, his parents, his brother and sister. They sat in a row, faces grim, united against me. But what broke me was seeing Ryan. He sat beside Martha, his little face confused and frightened. When he saw me in handcuffs, his eyes widened. "Mommy," he called out, his voice small in the large courtroom. "It's okay, baby." I tried to reassure him, even as a bailiff steered me toward the defendant's table. "Mommy loves you. Everything's going to be okay." Martha put her arm around him, pulling him close as she whispered something in his ear. His expression changed from confusion to something like fear as he looked back at me. The charges were read. Bail was set at an amount I couldn't possibly afford, and I was remanded to custody. As they led me out, I looked back at my family. John wouldn't meet my eyes. Martha stared coldly, and Ryan, my beautiful boy, was crying, reaching for me as Martha held him back. "Mommy," he screamed. "Don't leave me." I fought against the bailiff's grip, desperate to reach my son. "I love you, Ryan. Be brave for Mommy. I'll come back for you." Martha pulled him toward the exit. The last thing I saw was her bending down to speak to him, her hand firmly on his shoulder as she led him away from the mother he would soon be taught to forget. The trial was a farce. The public defender assigned to me was overwhelmed with cases and underprepared. John had hired a prestigious law firm that methodically dismantled my credibility. They portrayed me as a gold digger who had married John for his family's money and grew desperate when the business faced difficulties. They presented the forged signatures as genuine, using a handwriting expert with impeccable credentials who testified they matched my writing. Former employees of Miller Transport came forward with stories clearly coached about how I had interfered in business operations, despite having no official role. Old friends suddenly recalled conversations where I'd complained about money and spoken of taking control of the company's finances. But the most damaging testimony came from John himself. He took the stand looking appropriately devastated, a man betrayed by the woman he loved. "I trusted her completely," he said, his voice breaking for effect. "She was my wife, the mother of my child. I never imagined she could do something like this." When asked why he hadn't noticed the financial irregularities sooner, he sighed deeply. "Karen handled our personal finances and gradually took over more responsibilities at the company. I was focused on operations and clients. She was smart. She knew exactly how to hide what she was doing." The prosecutor asked, "And when did you become aware of the extent of the fraud?" John looked directly at me for the first time. "When the FBI contacted me, It was the worst day of my life. I had to face that the woman I married had not only betrayed me and our business, but had put our son's future at risk. I watched from the defendant's table, numb with disbelief. This stranger with my husband's face was systematically destroying me with lies, and the jury was believing every word. My attorney did his best during cross-examination, but John was well prepared. He answered questions with just the right mix of regret and righteous indignation. When confronted with the fact that I had no access to business accounts without his authorization, he claimed I'd obtained his passwords by spying on him. The final blow came when Martha testified. She spoke of welcoming me into the family despite my different background, of mentoring me, of loving Ryan deeply. Then, with perfect theatrical timing, she dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "The hardest part," she said, looking at the jury, "is knowing how this will affect my grandson. Ryan adored his mother. Now he asks every day when she's coming home, and I don't know what to tell him." I wanted to scream that she was lying, that she had never welcomed me, that she was probably poisoning Ryan against me at that very moment. But my attorney had warned me repeatedly to control my emotions, that outbursts would only reinforce their portrayal of me as unstable. So I sat, hands clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms, and watched Martha Miller perform her role as the grieving grandmother. When the jury returned after just 4 hours of deliberation, I knew it was over. The foreman avoided my gaze as he delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, a golf buddy of John's father I would later learn, sentenced me to 7 years in federal prison. As he announced the sentence, he added a personal rebuke that made it clear he saw me as particularly despicable. "Mrs. Miller, you have not only committed crimes against society and the tax code, but you have betrayed the trust of a family that welcomed you. Most reprehensibly, you have deprived a young child of his mother through your selfish actions. I sincerely hope you use your time in prison to reflect on the damage you have caused." As the bailiff approached to take me away, I finally broke. "I didn't do this," I shouted, looking directly at John. "Tell them the truth. Think about what you're doing to Ryan." John looked away, his arm around his mother's shoulders. "Please," I begged as the bailiff took my arm. "Let me say goodbye to my son, please." But Ryan wasn't in the courtroom. I later learned Martha had deemed it too traumatic for him to see the sentencing. I was led away in handcuffs, with no chance to hold my child one last time, to tell him I loved him, to promise I would come back. That day, Karen Miller ceased to exist in the eyes of society. I became inmate number 87392, a cautionary tale, the woman who betrayed the respected Miller family, the wretched woman. Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, became my home for the next 7 years. I entered those gates in a daze, still unable to process how completely my life had been stolen from me. The intake process was humiliating: strip searches, delousing, medical exams conducted with clinical detachment. They took my wedding ring, the locket with Ryan's picture, the small gold cross my grandmother had given me. In return, I received a prison uniform, slip-on shoes, and a thin blanket that smelled of industrial detergent. That first night, lying on a narrow bunk in a cell shared with a woman who snored loudly and muttered in her sleep, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was a nightmare I might wake from. The reality was too brutal, too absolute to comprehend. But morning came, and with it, the harsh routine of prison life. Counts, meals, work assignments, more counts. Days bled into each other, marked only by the changing of guards and the muted shift of seasons glimpsed through barred windows. For weeks, I went through the motions like a ghost. I ate without tasting, walked without seeing, spoke only when necessary. Other inmates gave me a wide berth, recognizing the hollow-eyed shock of the newly incarcerated. The only thing that kept me tethered to sanity was Ryan. I wrote to him every day letters filled with memories of our time together, with questions about school and friends, with assurances that Mommy loved him and would come home someday. I never knew if those letters reached him. Not one was answered. I called the Miller house every Sunday during my allotted phone time. The calls were never accepted. After 3 months, the number was changed to an unlisted one. Mother's Day that first spring was the lowest point. Women around me received cards, awkward crayon drawings, the occasional visit. I sat alone in my cell, having skipped the special visitation hours that only highlighted my isolation. "First one's the hardest," said a voice from the doorway. A tall black woman with graying braids stood there, a paperback book in her hand. "I'm Elaine. You're the banker's wife, right? Trucker's wife," I corrected automatically. "Was," she nodded, entering without waiting for an invitation. My kids didn't write either. First couple years, ex-husband convinced them I was better off forgotten. I looked up, really seeing her for the first time. Did they ever? My oldest started writing after 3 years, she said, sitting on the edge of my bunk. The younger ones followed. Now they visit when they can. She smiled sadly. Kids have good hearts. It's the adults who poison them. That conversation was the beginning of my first prison friendship. Elaine Washington had been an accountant before her ex-husband framed her for his financial crimes, a parallel that wasn't lost on either of us. She'd served 4 years of a 10-year sentence and had learned how to survive the system. Under Elaine's guidance, I slowly emerged from my depression. She encouraged me to join the prison education program, to exercise in the yard, to find purpose in small daily goals. You've got 2 choices in here, she told me bluntly. You can let this place kill you slowly, or you can use it. Learn something. Build something inside yourself they can't take away. I chose the latter. I enrolled in every business and finance course offered through the prison's limited education program. I read voraciously textbooks, financial journals, anything I could get through the prison library. When those resources proved insufficient, Elaine introduced me to another inmate who worked in the administration office and could request specific materials from the public library. At night, after lights out, I would lie in my bunk and apply what I'd learned to hypothetical business scenarios, mentally solving problems and creating strategies. It was a way to escape the confines of my cell, to exercise the part of me that hadn't yet surrendered to despair. The prison librarian, Mrs. Patel, became another ally. She noticed my interest in business literature and began setting aside relevant books and magazines. You have a good mind for systems, she observed one day as I returned a textbook on corporate finance. What will you do with this knowledge when you leave? I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. I don't know. Who would hire an ex-con? She smiled gently. Perhaps you won't need to be hired. Perhaps you'll build something of your own. The idea took root, growing alongside my studies. I began to imagine a future beyond prison walls, not a return to my old life, which was irrevocably lost, but something new. Something built with the knowledge I was accumulating and the resilience I was developing through suffering. News about Ryan came sporadically and indirectly. A new inmate who lived in our town mentioned seeing the Miller boy at a school basketball game. Tall kid, good player, she said, not realizing she was describing my son. He would have been 10 by then. Later, a guard who recognized my last name mentioned that his daughter attended the same private school as some kid named Miller, whose dad ran that trucking company that got in trouble a while back. From him, I learned that Ryan was on the honor roll, that he still played basketball, that he seemed like a good kid. Each crumb of information was precious. I held them close, building a patchwork image of the boy who was growing up without me. In my mind, he still had my eyes, still had the cowlick at the crown of his head that never lay flat, still had the laugh that could illuminate a room. I tried to track John's life as well, less from any lingering attachment than from a need to understand what had happened to our family. Through newspaper articles and business journals in the prison library, I learned that Miller Transport had survived its financial troubles. John had restructured the company, a sanitized term for what I suspected was a complete overhaul using insurance money and possibly new investors. There was no mention of fraud or financial crimes. The Miller name had been protected, the scandal buried. John had emerged unscathed, his reputation intact, while I rotted in prison for his crimes. In my 4th year of incarceration, Elaine was released. Before leaving, she held me in a long embrace. Don't let the bitterness eat you, Karen, she whispered. It'll hollow you out faster than this place ever could. I don't know how to let it go, I admitted. They stole everything from me. She pulled back, her hands firm on my shoulders. Then take it back. Not the same life that's gone, but something better, something they can't touch. She pressed a slip of paper into my hand. My sister's address. When you get out, you contact me. I'll help you land on your feet. After Elaine left, the days grew longer again. I threw myself even deeper into my studies, now including real estate, investment strategies, and small business management. I began to formulate a plan for life after prison, a plan built around financial independence and eventually, a reconnection with Ryan, who would be a teenager by the time I was released. I also started writing letters to him again, but with a different approach. Instead of sending them to the Miller house, where they would likely be intercepted, I saved them in a journal. Someday, I promised myself, he would read these words and understand that I had never stopped loving him, never stopped fighting to return to him. In my 5th year, I received my first and only visitor, my Aunt Louise. She had been overseas with her military husband when I was arrested and had only recently returned to find me incarcerated. She came bearing photographs of Ryan she had surreptitiously taken at a school function, the first images I'd seen of my son in 5 years. I barely recognized him. The round-faced little boy had been replaced by a lanky preteen with John's jawline, and, still, unmistakably, my eyes. He was wearing a private school uniform and standing with a group of friends, laughing at something out of frame. "He looks happy," I said, my voice breaking as I traced his face with a trembling finger. "He seems to be," Aunt Lou confirmed. I couldn't get too close without raising suspicion. The Millers are still influential in town. "Does he ever ask about me?" Aunt Lou's hesitation told me everything before she spoke. "Karen, honey, from what I can gather, he's been told a story about you, not the truth." "What story?" I demanded, though I already knew. "That you embezzled money, that you were going to abandon him and John, that you didn't love him enough to stay." She reached for my hand across the visitation table. "It's not true, and someday he'll know that." I pulled my hand away, anger flaring. "Someday he's being raised on lies. They've poisoned him against me. You have to survive this," Aunt Lou interrupted firmly. "You have to get out of here with your mind intact and your spirit unbroken. Then you can fight. But not now. Not from in here." She was right. Of course. Prison had taught me patience, if nothing else. I had to bide my time, prepare for the day I would walk free. And then only then could I begin to reclaim what was left of my life. The final 2 years of my sentence passed in a gray monotony punctuated by small victories. I completed a business certificate program through a prison education initiative. I mentored newer inmates, teaching basic financial literacy. I worked in the prison library, cataloging books and occasionally ordering new ones that would help my ongoing self-education. And I planned, hour by hour, day by day. I refined my strategy for life after release. I had no illusions about the challenges I would face as a convicted felon. Jobs would be scarce, housing difficult, and social acceptance nearly impossible. But I had knowledge now, and a clarity of purpose that comes only from having everything stripped away. 3 weeks before my release date, I received a letter from Elaine. Inside was a bus ticket to Chicago, where she now lived, and a note, "A room is waiting, so is a fresh start." On March 15, 2004, I walked out of FCI Danbury with nothing but a plastic bag containing the clothes I'd worn to prison now hanging loosely on my thinner frame, $40 in gate money, and the bus ticket from Elaine. No family waited to greet me. No friends stood by with welcome signs. I was 42 years old, a convicted felon, and invisible to the world that had once been my home. The woman who had entered prison, the trusting wife, the devoted mother, the person who believed in fairness and justice was dead. In her place stood someone harder, someone forged in betrayal and isolation. As the prison gates closed behind me, I made a silent vow. The Millers had called me the wretched woman and made it my identity for 7 years. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought I would disappear into the margins of society, a footnote in their family history. They were wrong. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to rise. And when I did, the name Karen Miller would no longer be whispered with contempt. It would be spoken with respect. And someday, it would be spoken with fear by those who had tried to bury me. The private investigator's interest in my affairs was more than a fleeting concern. It became a shadow that followed me through each business decision. I began operating with even greater caution, using multiple layers of LLCs for new acquisitions, and eliminating any paper trail that might connect Karen Miller to my growing real estate empire. My business strategy evolved from cautious expansion to deliberate diversification. If one part of my operation came under scrutiny, the others needed to remain intact. I established separate business entities for different geographical regions, hired regional managers who had no knowledge of my other operations, and maintained strict compartmentalization of financial information. With James Thompson's continued mentorship and investment connections, I identified opportunities for growth in markets where the Millers had no presence. Charlotte, Houston, and eventually Chicago's northern suburbs became focal points for KM accommodations. "You're building something remarkable," James told me during one of our quarterly review meetings. "Most people with your background would be satisfied with mere survival. You're creating generational wealth. I smiled at the irony. Without a generation to pass it to, what's the point? James studied me thoughtfully. This is still about your son. Everything is about Ryan, I admitted. I've missed his childhood. I won't miss his adulthood. In the fall of 2009, 5.5 years after my release, I faced my first major business crisis when the global financial recession hit the travel and hospitality industry. Bookings dropped precipitously across all properties, threatening the cash flow I needed for mortgage payments and operational costs. I called an emergency meeting with my key staff and investors, presenting a bold pivot strategy. Short-term rentals are vulnerable during economic downturns, I explained, pointing to charts showing declining occupancy rates. But corporate housing and mid-term rentals remain stable. Companies still relocate employees. Consultants still need accommodations for projects, and individuals going through life transitions still need temporary housing. I proposed converting a portion of our properties from nightly rentals to monthly furnished accommodations, targeting corporations with rotating staff and professionals on temporary assignments. The move required additional investment in more durable furnishings and longer vacancy periods during the transition, but promised more stable income. Some investors balked at the additional costs during an already precarious time. I stood firm. This isn't just about surviving the recession, I argued. It's about emerging stronger on the other side. Companies are cutting travel budgets but still need people on the ground. We can offer them a 30% savings compared to hotels while maintaining higher margins than traditional landlords. James backed my plan, convincing the more hesitant investors. She hasn't been wrong yet, he reminded them. I'm increasing my stake. The pivot worked. While many short-term rental operators went under during the recession, KM accommodations maintained profitability, albeit with tighter margins. Our corporate clients signed longer contracts, providing stable cash flow that saw us through the worst economic conditions. By 2010, we were positioned to acquire distressed properties at bargain prices from over-leveraged landlords desperate to sell. I was careful to target properties with sound fundamentals in neighborhoods likely to recover quickly, buildings near hospitals, university campuses, and stable corporate headquarters. My business methods remained conservative and cash-focused. While others rushed to leverage cheap debt for acquisitions, I maintained substantial cash reserves and kept loan-to-value ratios low. The financial collapse had taught me that leverage was a double-edged sword that could destroy everything in a downturn. You're being too cautious, one investor complained during a particularly heated meeting. We could triple our holdings with the lending terms available now. I spent 7 years in prison for financial crimes I didn't commit. I replied evenly. I won't risk anyone else's future on excessive debt, no matter how attractive the terms appear. The statement silenced the room. It was the first time I'd referenced my past so directly with my business associates. Most knew pieces of my story through James, but hearing it stated plainly changed the dynamic. After that meeting, 2 investors pulled out, uncomfortable with the perceived risk of my background. 3 others increased their stakes, impressed by my prudence and integrity. James pulled me aside afterward. That took courage, he said. But it was the right move. This business is built on your judgment. They needed to understand where that judgment comes from. By my 6th year of freedom, KM accommodations had weathered the recession and emerged stronger. With 32 properties across 5 cities, my personal net worth, while still modest compared to established real estate players, had crossed the 7-figure threshold, an achievement that would have seemed impossible during those first desperate days after my release. Yet despite this success, I lived simply. My Chicago condo was comfortable, but not luxurious. I drove a reliable but unassuming car. I had no expensive hobbies, no lavish vacations, no designer wardrobe. Every dollar beyond my basic needs was either reinvested in the business or added to what I privately called my Ryan Fund money, set aside for the future I hoped to rebuild with my son. In the spring of 2011, Aunt Louise called with news that sent my carefully laid plans into acceleration. Ryan's been accepted to Northwestern, she said, her voice brimming with pride. Full academic scholarship. Karen, he's going to be in Chicago next fall. My heart raced. Chicago, are you sure? Positive. Martha's been bragging about it at church. Though she's not happy he'll be so far from home, she wanted him to attend state like his father. My mind whirled with implications. My son, my boy, would be in the same city where I'd built my new life. The proximity was both thrilling and terrifying. Does he know I'm in Chicago? I asked. I don't think so, Aunt Louise replied. He knows you're alive, I made sure of that much, but the Millers have kept him in the dark about your whereabouts. After the call, I paced my apartment for hours, calculating risks and possibilities. Ryan would be 18 by the time he started college, legally an adult, free to make his own decisions about whom to contact. But approaching him too soon could backfire spectacularly if the Millers had poisoned him against me completely. I needed more information about his current thinking, his relationship with John and Martha, his understanding of the past, and I needed a plan for how and when to make my presence known. After careful consideration, I contacted Linda Martinez. I need a private investigator, I told her. Someone discreet, ethical, and very thorough. They'll be looking into my own son, so this needs to be handled delicately. Linda recommended a former police detective who specialized in sensitive family matters. Thomas Reeves was in his 50s, with a calm demeanor and kind eyes that belied his sharp investigative skills. I met him at Linda's office, where I could speak freely under attorney-client privilege. I want to be absolutely clear, I said after explaining my situation. I'm not stalking my son. I'm trying to understand the environment he's been raised in and his current state of mind before I approach him. I don't want to cause him additional trauma. Reeves nodded. I understand. Mrs. Miller, my job isn't just to gather information, it's to assess potential harm. If I believe your contact would be damaging to him, I'll tell you. That's exactly what I need, I said, relieved. Complete honesty, even if it's not what I want to hear. For the next 3 months, Reeves conducted a thorough but unintrusive investigation. He observed Ryan at school events, interviewed teachers and coaches under the pretext of a college security clearance, and gathered public information about the Miller family's current circumstances. His final report was comprehensive and illuminating. Ryan Miller appears to be a well-adjusted young man on the surface, he wrote. Academically gifted, particularly in mathematics and economics, socially reserved but not isolated. No signs of substance abuse or serious behavioral issues. That was the good news. The more concerning findings came in the assessment of Ryan's family dynamics. Subject's relationship with John Miller is distant. They speak infrequently, with John missing most of his son's significant events. Multiple sources describe John as uninvolved in parenting. John has remarried and has 2 young children with his current wife. The revelation that Ryan had half-siblings hit me hard, children who would know their father in ways Ryan never had. Children whose mother hadn't been erased. Subject's relationship with Martha Miller is more complex. The report continued. She maintains significant control over his daily life, educational decisions, and social circle. Multiple sources described her as overbearing and possessive. Ryan demonstrates subtle resistance behaviors, missed check-ins, independent decision-making about college, but generally complies with her expectations. Most importantly, Reeves had managed to gauge Ryan's awareness of me. Subject knows his mother is alive and was incarcerated. Information about circumstances appears limited and heavily filtered. When your name was mentioned indirectly in conversation with a classmate whose parent knew you, subject became attentive but did not ask questions. This suggests curiosity but caution, possibly fear of repercussions for expressing interest. The report concluded with Reeves's professional assessment. In my opinion, direct contact would be premature at this stage. Subject appears to be using college as an opportunity to establish independence from controlling family influences. This natural separation may create space for him to seek information about you on his own terms. A gradual approach that allows him agency in the process would likely be more successful than an immediate revelation. I read the report multiple times, absorbing every detail about my son's life. The boy I'd left behind at 6 was now nearly 18, a young man shaped by forces I couldn't control, carrying burdens I hadn't been able to protect him from. Reeves's recommendation for patience was sound, but difficult to accept when Ryan would soon be so close. Nevertheless, I developed a measured approach. I would not ambush him or force a reunion. Instead, I would create conditions where he might discover me, where curiosity could lead to contact if he chose it. First, I established a more public profile for my business. KM Accommodations had operated in the shadows for years, but now I authorized a professional website with my full name and a brief biography. I didn't mention my conviction that information was readily available to anyone who searched my name, but I didn't hide my identity either. Next, I purchased a home in the northern suburb of Evanston, close to Northwestern's campus. The house was modest by neighborhood standards, but well-maintained, with a small yard and a converted garage that could serve as a guest apartment. It would be my primary residence going forward, managed through yet another LLC to maintain privacy until I chose to reveal myself. I also established a small scholarship at Northwestern for students studying business with an interest in entrepreneurship. The Karen Miller Second Chance Scholarship wasn't large enough to attract media attention, but would exist in university records. Another breadcrumb for Ryan to potentially discover. These measures struck a balance between making myself findable and respecting Ryan's need for space. If he searched for me as I believed he eventually would, he would find a successful businesswoman who had rebuilt her life, not a bitter ex-convict consumed by revenge. The strategy required patience I wasn't sure I possessed. As August approached and freshman orientation loomed, I found myself driving past Northwestern's campus with increasing frequency, hoping for glimpses of incoming students and their families. I knew the move-in schedule from the university's website, and the temptation to accidentally appear during that time was nearly overwhelming. Aunt Louise provided a vital reality check during one of our weekly calls. "You've waited 7 years in prison and 7 years rebuilding your life," she reminded me. "Don't risk everything by rushing now. Let him find his feet at college before you complicate his world." She was right, of course. Ryan would be experiencing enough upheaval adjusting to college life. Adding the shock of his long-lost mother's reappearance could derail his fresh start completely. So I focused on my business, which continued to expand despite my personal preoccupations. I opened a small corporate office in downtown Chicago, hired an operations director to handle day-to-day management, and began exploring opportunities in commercial real estate as a natural extension of our corporate housing services. The work kept me grounded as fall arrived and Northwestern's campus filled with students. I limited myself to occasional drives through campus, never lingering, never searching too obviously for a familiar face among the thousands of young people navigating their new environment. In October, I received a call from Thomas Reeves. "Mrs. Miller, I thought you should know that Ryan has been asking questions about you." My heart leapt. What kind of questions, to whom? He approached a history professor who specializes in wrongful convictions, asked about researching a case from the late 90s involving a woman convicted of embezzlement from a family business. Did he mention me by name? No, but the professor suggested he was speaking about a personal connection. Ryan didn't confirm or deny it. The news was both encouraging and concerning. Ryan was curious enough to seek information, but cautious enough to maintain deniability. Was he afraid of his grandparents' reaction if they discovered his interest? Or was he simply protecting himself emotionally from painful history? "There's more," Reeves continued. "He's been on your company website. The university tracks student internet usage on campus networks, not the content, just the domains. Your site appeared in a routine security scan because it's categorized as a local business. So he knows I'm in Chicago," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It appears so. Whether he's made the connection to your proximity to campus, I can't say." After Reeves's call, I doubled my efforts to maintain a low profile around campus while ensuring I remained discoverable through normal channels. I authorized a small profile of KM, accommodations in a business publication, mentioning our corporate housing solutions for visiting professors and university affiliates. I attended a Chamber of Commerce event where Northwestern representatives were present. I created breadcrumbs without forcing a trail. In December, as students prepared for winter break, I received another update from Reeves. Martha Miller arrived yesterday to help Ryan pack for the holiday. They had lunch at a campus cafe, and according to my source, the conversation became heated. Ryan left abruptly, and Martha followed, visibly upset. "Do you know what they argued about, Yon?" Not specifically, but Ryan was overheard saying, "I'm old enough to make my own decisions." Martha responded with something about that woman and lies. My stomach clenched. Had Ryan mentioned me? Had he discovered more than I realized? "There's one more thing," Reeves added. "Ryan isn't returning home for the entire break. He's staying with a roommate's family in Michigan for part of it." This appears to be a new development. Martha was clearly surprised and unhappy about the arrangement. The information confirmed what I had hoped. Ryan was establishing independence, creating distance from the controlling influence of his grandmother. It was a natural part of growing up, but in our complicated circumstances, it represented a critical shift in power dynamics. As winter deepened, I maintained my patient approach, focusing on business expansion and community integration in Evanston. I joined the local business association, made charitable donations to neighborhood initiatives, and carefully constructed the life of a successful entrepreneur with roots in the community. In February, a snowstorm hit Chicago with unusual ferocity, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow and shutting down much of the city. Northwestern canceled classes, and students found themselves unexpectedly confined to campus or nearby housing. I was at home in Evanston, working remotely and watching the snow pile up outside my windows, when my phone rang with an unlisted number. Hello, is this Karen Miller of KM Accommodations? The voice was young, male, and hesitant. Yes, this is Karen, I replied, setting aside my laptop. How can I help you? My name is Ryan Miller. I think you might be my mother. The world stopped. My carefully laid plans, my measured approach, my years of patience all rendered irrelevant by 6 simple words. My son had found me, and he had taken the step I hadn't dared to take. Yes, I said, my voice miraculously steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I am your mother. Ryan? The silence that followed felt eternal. I could hear his breathing, slightly uneven, and imagined him sitting in his dorm room, perhaps looking out at the same snowscape I was seeing. I've been researching you, he finally said. For months now. I found the court transcripts, news articles, your business website. I even drove by your office once. I know, I admitted. I hired someone to keep an eye on you, not to interfere, just to understand how you were doing. I wanted to approach you, but I was afraid of causing you more pain. Another silence, shorter this time. Grandma Martha said you abandoned us, that you stole from the company and were planning to leave the country without me, that you told the police you never wanted to be a mother. The familiar pain of those lies cut deep, but I kept my voice calm. None of that is true. Ryan, I loved you more than anything in this world. I wrote to you every week from prison. I tried to call. When I was released, I rebuilt my life with one purpose, to reach a point where I could safely reconnect with you. Dad never talks about you, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. When I asked questions growing up, he changed the subject or left the room. Grandma was the one who told me everything, or what she claimed was everything. Your father had his reasons, I said carefully, unwilling to vilify John despite everything. We both made choices. The difference is that mine were made for me, not by me. Why should I believe you over them? He asked, the question direct but not hostile. You shouldn't, not without evidence, I replied honestly. I can show you documents, introduce you to people who knew the truth, share letters I wrote that were never delivered. But Ryan, I don't want to overwhelm you or force you to choose sides right now. You reached out to me, that's enough for today. The tension in his voice eased slightly. I found a photograph in the attic at Grandma's house last summer. You were holding me at what looked like my 2nd birthday. You didn't look like someone who didn't want to be a mother. My eyes filled with tears at the memory. Your 2nd birthday. You smashed cake all over your face and then tried to hug everyone. Your dad took that picture. We were happy then. Ryan. All of us. For the first time, I heard a small laugh from him. I've always made a mess when I eat. Grandma hates it. You get that from me, I said, smiling through my tears. Your father was always neat, even as a child, according to your grandmother. The conversation continued for almost an hour, careful, circling around the most painful subjects, focusing instead on small connections, shared traits, neutral memories. Ryan asked about my business, and I explained my path after prison without bitterness or blame. I asked about his studies, his friends, his interests, and listened with hungry attention to every detail. As the call neared its end, he grew more serious. Grandma would be furious if she knew I called you. You're 18 now, I reminded him gently. You have the right to know your own history, to make your own decisions about relationships. I'm not ready to tell her, he admitted. Or Dad. I need time to process everything, to figure out what's true. I understand, I assured him. This is entirely on your terms. Ryan, you decide when, where, and if we continue this conversation. I've waited 14 years to hear your voice. I can wait as long as you need for what comes next. After a moment's hesitation, he asked, would it be okay if I called you again, maybe after midterms? I would like that very much, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. When the call ended, I sat motionless, phone still clutched in my hand, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. My son had reached across the chasm that separated us, had taken the first step toward bridging years of absence and lies. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, Ryan and I established a tentative communication pattern. He would call every few days, usually in the evening when his roommate was at the library. Our conversations remained cautious, but grew incrementally more open as he tested my responses, looking for inconsistencies or manipulations he'd been warned to expect. I answered every question truthfully, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Yes, I had been in prison. Yes, the Millers had wealth and connections that I lacked. Yes, there were aspects of his childhood I couldn't share because I hadn't been there, but I also shared documentation court transcripts that showed the flimsy evidence against me. Letters returned unopened, records of my attempts to maintain contact. I connected him with Linda Martinez, who confirmed my version of events from a legal perspective. I introduced him via phone to Elaine, who had known me in prison and could attest to my unwavering focus on returning to him. Slowly, painfully, Ryan began to reconstruct his understanding of the past. The process wasn't linear. He would seem convinced of my innocence one day, then return to doubt after speaking with Martha. He was caught between contradictory narratives, trying to reconcile the grandmother who had raised him with the mother who had been erased. In late March, he asked to meet in person. Not in public, he specified. Somewhere private. I don't want anyone from Northwestern to see and mention it to the alumni network. Word might get back to Grandma. I suggested my home in Evanston. It's close enough to campus that you could walk, but in a neighborhood where students rarely go. We set a date for the following Saturday afternoon. I spent the intervening days in a state of controlled panic, cleaning obsessively, preparing Ryan's favorite foods based on casual mentions in our conversations, selecting photographs and documents that might help him understand our shared history. When the doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock, I forced myself to wait 3 seconds before opening it. And there he was, my son, standing on my porch, tall and lean in a Northwestern sweatshirt and jeans, his eyes, my eyes, wary but determined. "Hi," he said simply. "Hello, Ryan," I replied, stepping back to let him enter. "Welcome." He crossed the threshold hesitantly, scanning the living room with the careful attention I recognized from my own tendency to assess new environments. His gaze lingered on a framed photograph on the mantel, a school picture of him at 10 that Aunt Louise had smuggled to me years before. "You've had that all this time?" he asked. I nodded. "Aunt Louise sent it to me in prison. It was one of the few images I had of you growing up. I've kept it with me through every move, every change." He moved closer to examine the photo, then turned to study me directly. I stood still under his scrutiny, allowing him to reconcile the mother he vaguely remembered with the woman before him now. "You look different from what I remember," he finally said. "But your eyes are the same." "You have them too," I replied softly. "Your father's jawline, but my eyes. You always did." The afternoon unfolded with careful conversation over cookies and iced tea, reviewing documents I'd gathered, looking at the few photographs I had from our time as a family. Ryan asked pointed questions about the financial crimes I'd been accused of, displaying a sophisticated understanding of business operations that surprised me. "I've been studying finance and accounting," he explained when I commented on his knowledge. "I wanted to understand exactly what you were supposed to have done." "And what conclusions did you reach?" I asked, heart pounding. He frowned slightly. "The case against you was circumstantial at best. The signatures on key documents don't match your known handwriting from earlier records, and the timing of certain transactions conflicts with alibis you had, like being at my kindergarten play when a wire transfer was initiated from the office computer." His analytical approach, free from emotional entanglement, had allowed him to see what the jury had missed or had been led to ignore. I felt a surge of pride at his intelligence and thoroughness. "There's something else," he continued, his expression darkening. "Last year, I overheard Dad arguing with Grandma about the business. He said something about the same mistake twice, and how he couldn't take the fall again. Grandma told him to lower his voice, that I might hear. The implications hung between us. Ryan had begun to suspect the truth even before finding evidence of my existence. "I'm not asking you to condemn your father," I said carefully. "Whatever happened, he's still your father." Ryan's jaw tightened, John's expression on my son's face. "A father who let my mother go to prison for his crimes. Who let me believe lies about you my entire life. People make terrible choices when they're afraid," I said, though the justification felt hollow even to my ears. "Your father was trying to save the business, his family's legacy. He made a desperate decision, and then couldn't find a way back from it." Ryan stood abruptly, pacing the living room. "Don't defend him. Not to me." I watched him move, this young man who had been formed in my absence, who carried burdens I couldn't lighten and anger I couldn't soothe. For all our careful rebuilding of facts, the emotional terrain between us remained largely uncharted. "What happens now?" I asked softly. "What do you want from this relationship, Ryan?" He stopped pacing, looking suddenly young and uncertain. "I don't know. I'm still processing everything. Part of me wants to confront Dad and Grandma, demand the truth. Part of me wants to pretend I never found out. Go back to the life I had before. And what about me? I asked, voicing the question that terrified me most. Do you want me in your life going forward? Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. I think I do. Not all at once, not overnight, but yes, I want to know my mother. Those simple words, I want to know my mother, were the most beautiful I had ever heard. Our meeting ended with a tentative plan to continue building our relationship gradually. Ryan would maintain his normal contact with the Millers while privately getting to know me. We would meet weekly when his schedule allowed, text or call in between, and navigate the complicated emotions that would inevitably arise. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. Can I? He began, then stopped, seeming embarrassed. What is it? I encouraged. Can I hug you? Is that weird after all this time? In answer, I opened my arms. He stepped forward awkwardly, and I embraced my son for the first time in 14 years. He was no longer the small boy I could lift and carry, but a young man taller than me, with shoulders broadening into adulthood. Yet when his arms closed around me, something ancient and primal clicked into place, the recognition between mother and child that transcends time and absence. When we separated, both wiping away tears, I saw a flash of the 6-year-old who had screamed for me in that courtroom doorway. The wound wasn't healed, might never fully heal, but we had taken the first step towards something new. As spring deepened, Ryan and I continued our careful rebuilding. He would visit my home in Evanston every weekend, sometimes staying for dinner, occasionally bringing coursework to complete while I worked nearby. We were learning each other's rhythms, preferences, conversational patterns, the 1,000 small details that families typically absorb over years of daily interaction. During one such visit in late April, Ryan arrived visibly agitated, pacing my living room with nervous energy. Grandma knows something's up, he blurted. She called last night asking weird questions, why I haven't been home to visit, who I'm spending time with, if I've been talking to strangers about family matters. My stomach clenched. Did she mention me specifically? No, but she hinted, said some people might try to take advantage of my naivety and turn me against the family. That I should remember who raised me. The implied threat was clear. Martha was suspicious and beginning to circle protectively or possessively around Ryan. What did you tell her? I asked. That I'm busy with school, making new friends. The usual college stuff. He ran a hand through his hair, John's gesture, one I remembered from our early years together. I hate lying, but I'm not ready for that confrontation. Not yet. I understood his hesitation. Martha Miller was a formidable opponent, and her influence over Ryan's life remained significant. A premature confrontation could force him to choose sides before he was emotionally prepared to do so. We have time, I assured him. You set the pace for all of this, Ryan. But time, it turned out, was a luxury we didn't have. The following week, as Ryan was leaving my house, a car slowed on the street outside a black Lincoln with tinted windows. Ryan froze on the sidewalk, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. That's Grandma's car, he whispered, turning back toward my door. She must have followed me. Before he could retreat, the car door opened, and Martha Miller emerged elegant as always in a tailored suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression a mask of cold fury. She hadn't aged as much as I expected in 14 years. Money and meticulous self-care had preserved her well. Ryan, she called, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet neighborhood. Get in the car, now. I stepped onto the porch beside my son, facing the woman who had orchestrated my destruction, who had poisoned my child against me for more than a decade. Our eyes met across the lawn, and the recognition that flashed in hers confirmed my suspicions. She had known I was in Chicago all along. Hello, Martha, I said calmly. It's been a long time. Her lips thinned to a bloodless line. Stay away from my grandson, you wretched woman. Ryan, I said get in the car. Ryan stood his ground, his shoulder brushing mine in a gesture that felt like solidarity. No, Grandma, I'm not going anywhere. We need to talk, all of us. Martha's carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing the panic beneath her anger. There's nothing to talk about. This woman is a convicted felon who tried to steal from our family. She abandoned you. She has no right to be in your life. That's not true, Ryan replied, his voice steady despite the tremor I could feel in his body. I've seen the evidence. I know what really happened. Evidence? Martha scoffed. Fabrications and excuses from a woman desperate to rewrite history. Your father, My father isn't here, Ryan interrupted. He never is when it matters, but I am, and I'm old enough to hear both sides and make my own judgments. I placed a gentle hand on Ryan's arm. Let's take this inside, I suggested. The neighbors don't need to witness a family dispute. Martha looked horrified at the suggestion. I will not enter that woman's house. Ryan, if you don't come with me now, there will be consequences. Your tuition is covered by scholarship, he finished for her. And I'm legally an adult. Your threats don't work anymore. Grandma, the standoff continued for several tense moments. Finally, Martha straightened, smoothing her jacket with practiced precision. Very well, you've made your choice. For now. But don't expect this matter to end here. She turned her cold gaze to me. You won't get away with this, Karen. Not again. With that cryptic warning, she returned to her car and drove away, leaving Ryan and me standing on the sidewalk in the aftermath of the confrontation we'd both been dreading. Ryan was shaking, reaction setting in now that the immediate crisis had passed. She's going to tell Dad. She'll try to cut me off financially. Emotionally, she's done it before with family members who cross her. I led him back inside, settling him on the couch with a glass of water. You stood your ground admirably, I told him. But Ryan, I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. If you need to step back from our relationship until things cool down. No, he said firmly. I'm done with secrets and lies. I've lived with them my entire life without realizing it. He looked at me directly. I want the truth, Mom, all of it. And I want them to face it too. It was the first time he had called me Mom since our reunion. Despite the circumstances, the word filled a hollow place inside me that had ached for 14 years. The confrontation with Martha accelerated everything. Within days, Ryan received calls from John, from Martha's lawyer, even from his father's new wife, all attempting to persuade him that he was being manipulated, that he should return to the family fold and cut contact with me. Ryan weathered the pressure with remarkable resilience, but the emotional toll was evident in the shadows under his eyes, in the way his grades began to slip. During one particularly difficult week, he stayed at my house rather than his dorm room, seeking refuge from the constant calls and texts. I never realized how controlling they were until I tried to break free. He confessed one evening as we sat on my back porch. Every decision, every friendship, every interest, Grandma had an opinion, an expectation. Dad went along with whatever she wanted. It's how she raised him, I said, understanding John more clearly now through the lens of our son's experience. Your father never stood up to her, even as an adult. It was easier to comply than to fight. Ryan's expression hardened. That's no excuse for what he did to you. To us. I didn't disagree. John's weakness had cost us everything, had robbed Ryan of his mother and me of my son's childhood. Yet hatred served no purpose now when we were trying to rebuild from ruins. As finals approached, bringing the academic year to a close, we faced a new challenge. Ryan had nowhere to go for summer break. The Millers had made it clear that he was unwelcome at home unless he severed ties with me. His scholarship covered academic terms, but not summer housing. Stay here, I offered without hesitation. I have the guest room. You could get a summer job locally, or an internship, maybe even work with my company if you're interested. The relief in his eyes was answer enough. Are you sure I don't want to impose? Ryan, having you in my home would be the opposite of an imposition. It would be a gift I never thought I'd receive. The decision made, we prepared for a summer of cohabitation, mother and son becoming reacquainted under one roof, navigating the everyday intimacies of shared space and daily routines. It wouldn't be easy after so many years apart, but it was an opportunity I had prayed for during long prison nights. What neither of us anticipated was Martha Miller's response to this arrangement. 2 weeks before the end of spring term, Ryan received a formal letter from a prestigious law firm representing the Miller family. They're suing you, he said incredulously, handing me the document. For defamation, emotional distress, and interference with family relations. They're claiming you've poisoned me against them with false accusations. I scanned the legal threats, my heart sinking. The Millers had significant resources and connections. The lawsuit itself might be baseless, but it could drag on for years, draining my finances and my energy. This is just the beginning, I told Ryan grimly. They'll use every tool at their disposal to separate us and protect their reputation. Ryan's jaw set in that determined line I was coming to recognize. Then we'll fight back, with the truth. His words were brave but naive. The truth was rarely enough in a system where money and influence often determined outcomes. I had learned that lesson at devastating personal cost. Still, we had advantages the Millers might not anticipate. My business success provided financial resources I hadn't had 14 years earlier. Linda Martinez was now an experienced attorney with connections of her own, and most importantly, Ryan was no longer a 6-year-old child but a young man capable of speaking for himself. As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, I realized that the empire I had built, the properties, the business structure, the financial security had been created for exactly this moment, not just to reclaim my son, but to defend him, to give him a foundation strong enough to withstand the storm that was coming. The wretched woman was gone. In her place stood Karen Miller, businesswoman, property owner, and most importantly, mother. And this time, I would not be fighting alone. The lawsuit from the Millers hung over our heads like a storm cloud throughout that summer of 2011, while Ryan worked as an intern at KM Accommodations, learning the business from the ground up. I met regularly with Linda Martinez to prepare our defense. The legal threats were serious but not insurmountable, especially now that I had resources to fight back. They're counting on intimidation, Linda explained during one strategy session. The Millers have always used their money and connections to control situations. They don't expect you to stand your ground. They don't know what prison teaches you, I replied grimly. Standing your ground becomes second nature when everything else is taken away. Despite the legal pressure, those summer months with Ryan were precious beyond measure. We developed routines: coffee together in the mornings before work, dinner discussions about business strategies, weekend explorations of Chicago neighborhoods neither of us had fully explored. The awkwardness between us gradually dissolved as we discovered shared traits: the same analytical approach to problems, the same dry sense of humor, even the same preference for organizing bookshelves by subject rather than author. It's weird how much we have in common, even though we were separated for so long, Ryan remarked one evening as we prepared dinner together. Nature over nurture, I guess. Some connections can't be erased, I said, passing him the cutting board. Not even by 14 years of absence. August brought Ryan's 19th birthday, the first I had celebrated with him since he turned 6. I arranged a small gathering with the few people who had supported us: Linda Martinez, James Thompson and his wife, Aunt Louise, who flew in specially for the occasion. No grand gestures, just a home-cooked meal, thoughtfully chosen gifts, and the family my son had never known he had. As fall approached, bringing Ryan's sophomore year at Northwestern, we received unexpected news. John Miller had filed for divorce from his second wife and was seeking temporary residence in Chicago ostensibly for business reasons, though the timing suggested other motivations. He's coming to try to reconcile with you, I told Ryan when he showed me the email from his father. Martha's strategy of threats and legal action isn't working, so they're changing tactics. Ryan frowned, scrolling through the message. He says he wants to meet, to explain his side of things, that there's more to the story than I know. There always is, I acknowledged. The question is whether you're ready to hear it. Ryan considered this carefully. I think I need to. Not for his sake, but for my own. I need to understand why he did what he did, why he let me believe those lies for so long. I nodded, respecting his decision, though anxiety twisted in my stomach. John had always been persuasive, charismatic when he wanted to be. What if he managed to drive a wedge between Ryan and me? Just as we were building a relationship. I'll go with you if you want, I offered. Or wait nearby. Ryan shook his head. This is something I need to do alone, but I promise I'll tell you everything afterward. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a coffee shop near Northwestern's campus. I drove Ryan there, waiting anxiously in my car a block away, ready to support him however he needed afterward. When he returned 90 minutes later, his expression was unreadable. He slid into the passenger seat silently, staring straight ahead. That bad? I asked softly. Worse, he replied, his voice tight. And better, in some ways. Can we go home before I tell you I need time to process? Back at the house, Ryan paced the living room, gathering his thoughts while I waited patiently. Finally, he sat heavily on the couch. He admitted everything, Ryan began, his voice flat. Not just the financial fraud that sent you to prison, but the whole setup: the forged signatures, the planted evidence, the cash in the closet. He said Martha orchestrated most of it, but he went along with it. He was too scared to stand up to her, too worried about losing the business. I absorbed this information silently, unsurprised but still pained by the confirmation. He cried, Ryan continued, disbelief coloring his tone. Actually cried, talking about how he's regretted it every day. How he wanted to tell me the truth as I got older, but couldn't find the courage. Said he's been living with the guilt for 14 years. And do you believe him? I asked carefully. Ryan's hands clenched into fists. That's the worst part. I think I do. Not that it excuses anything, but he seems genuinely broken by what he did. He said he's been drinking heavily for years, that his second marriage failed because he couldn't escape the guilt. My heart ached for my son, forced to witness his father's belated remorse. Did he say why he's coming forward now? He claims Martha's lawsuit was the last straw. Said he couldn't watch her try to destroy you a second time. Ryan laughed bitterly. He also mentioned he's been sober for 6 months and is making amends as part of his recovery program. I remained skeptical. John's timing seemed convenient, stepping in only after Martha's approach had failed, positioning himself as the repentant father rather than the coward who had sacrificed his wife and son's relationship for his own protection. What did he want from you? I asked, suspecting an agenda beyond confession. He wants to meet with both of us, to apologize to you in person. And, Ryan hesitated, he wants to testify against Martha if the lawsuit goes forward. He says he has documentation that proves she was the primary architect of the fraud that sent you to prison. The revelation stunned me. John turning against his mother was unprecedented. Martha had controlled him his entire life, had shaped his decisions, his marriage, even his parenting. That he would now betray her suggested either a profound change of character or a desperate attempt at self-preservation. What did you tell him? I asked. That I needed time to think about it, that I would discuss it with you. Ryan met my eyes directly. What do you think we should do? The question carried weight beyond the immediate decision about meeting John. Ryan was asking for my guidance, acknowledging my place in his life as a parent whose opinion mattered. I think we should hear what he has to say, I said after careful consideration. Not because he deserves forgiveness, but because his testimony could help end this legal harassment. And because you deserve complete answers about your childhood. Ryan nodded slowly. That's what I was thinking too. The meeting with John was arranged for the following weekend at my home. Neutral territory was no longer sufficient for a conversation of this magnitude. As the day approached, I found myself unexpectedly anxious, not just about John's intentions, but about seeing him after 14 years of separation. The man who arrived at my door was barely recognizable as the husband I had once loved. John Miller at 53 looked 15 years older, hair thinned and grayed, face lined and sagging, shoulders hunched as if perpetually bracing for impact. Only his eyes remained the same, that distinctive Miller blue that Ryan had fortunately not inherited. Karen, he said, his voice hoarse. Thank you for seeing me. I nodded stiffly, stepping aside to let him enter. Ryan stood in the living room, arms crossed defensively across his chest. The awkwardness was palpable as we settled in the living room. John perched on the edge of an armchair as if ready to flee at any moment. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. I don't know where to begin, he admitted. Anything I say will sound inadequate. Start with the truth, I suggested coolly. The complete truth. For once. John nodded, running a trembling hand through his thinning hair. The company was in trouble, worse trouble than anyone knew. Dad had been cooking the books for years before I took over, hiding losses, inflating revenues. When he died, I inherited a mess I didn't fully understand. He described discovering the extent of the financial deception, his panic as creditors began closing in, his desperate attempts to secure new financing to keep the business afloat. Mom suggested the first irregular transaction, he continued. Just a temporary transfer. She called it, customer funds moved to cover operational expenses. We'd put it back before anyone noticed. But one transaction became many. Small irregularities grew into significant fraud. When auditors began asking questions, Martha had suggested using me as the scapegoat. She never liked you, John admitted. Thought you weren't good enough for a Miller. Weren't trustworthy because you came from different circumstances. When we needed someone to blame, she immediately pointed to you. And you went along with it, Ryan interjected, anger vibrating in his voice. You let them arrest your wife, my mother, for something you did. John flinched visibly. Yes, I was a coward. I told myself it was to protect the business, to ensure your future. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was afraid of prison, afraid of disgrace. And once the lie started, I couldn't find a way to stop it. You could have told the truth at any point, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. During the investigation, at the trial, after my conviction, during the 7 years I spent in prison, during the 7 years since my release. You had 14 years of opportunities to set things right. John, I know, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. There's no excuse. I've lived with this guilt every day watching Ryan grow up without you, knowing what I'd stolen from both of you. Guilt didn't stop you from remarrying, from having more children, I pointed out. John's face crumpled. I thought I could start over, build a new life, but the past followed me. My drinking got worse. I couldn't connect with Ryan the way you had. I couldn't look at my new children without remembering what I'd done to my first family. His second marriage had collapsed under the weight of his alcoholism and emotional absence. His younger children barely knew him. The business had survived but never thrived, hampered by his inconsistent leadership and Martha's increasingly erratic financial decisions. Mom's been making the same mistakes that started all this, he explained. Taking out loans we can't repay, using one account to cover shortfalls in another. The business is on the brink again, and she refuses to acknowledge it. Is that why you're here? I asked bluntly. Because Martha's about to sink the company, and you need a lifeboat. John shook his head wearily. I'm here because I joined a 12-step program 6 months ago, and part of recovery is making amends where possible. I know I can never fully repair the damage I've done, but I had to try. For Ryan's sake, if not for yours. He reached into his jacket and removed a thick envelope. These are documents that prove what really happened. Bank records showing transactions in my name that were attributed to you. Emails between me and Mom discussing how to frame you. My own written statement confessing to everything. Ryan took the envelope, examining its contents with the careful scrutiny I recognized from our shared analytical nature. His expression remained guarded, but I could see the impact of his father's confession in the slight tremor of his hands. Why would you incriminate yourself like this? Ryan asked. These documents could lead to charges against you. The statute of limitations has expired on most of the financial crimes, John explained. I could still face perjury charges for my testimony at Karen's trial, but my lawyer thinks a judge would be lenient given the circumstances and my voluntary confession. He turned to me, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I don't expect forgiveness. Karen, what I did is unforgivable, but I want you to have the vindication you deserve. I want Ryan to know the truth, and I want to stop Mom from hurting either of you again. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, though whether it stemmed from genuine remorse or desperate self-preservation remained unclear. Perhaps both motivations existed simultaneously in the broken man before us. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, setting emotion aside to focus on practicalities. I'll testify against Mom if the lawsuit goes to court. I'll make a public statement clearing your name. I'll do whatever you think is appropriate to set the record straight. He hesitated, then added, and I'd like a chance to rebuild some kind of relationship with Ryan, if he's willing. Ryan remained silent, his expression conflicted. The documents in his hands represented everything we had needed 14 years ago, evidence that could have prevented my conviction, preserved our family, protected his childhood. Their appearance now, while valuable for our legal defense, couldn't restore what had been lost. I need time to process this, Ryan finally said. All of it. John nodded, rising slowly. I understand. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown for the next month. You can reach me anytime. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at us, the family he had destroyed with his cowardice. I'm sorry. It's not enough, but it's true. After he left, Ryan and I sat in silence, the envelope of evidence between us like a bomb waiting to detonate. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice thick with emotion. All those years, I thought you abandoned me. Grandma said you didn't care, that you chose money over being my mother. I was so angry at you. I used to cry myself to sleep wondering why my own mother didn't love me enough to stay. The pain in his words shattered something inside me. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hands in mine. I thought about you every day. Every single day. Ryan, I wrote hundreds of letters they never gave you. I celebrated your birthday every year alone in my cell. You were my first thought each morning and my last thought each night. Tears streamed down his face, not the controlled emotion of our earlier reunions, but raw, cathartic grief for the childhood he had lost, for the mother who had been erased from his life. I believe you, he said through his tears. I believe you loved me then. I believe you love me now." I pulled him into my arms, this grown son who still carried the wounded child within him. We cried together, mourning 14 years that could never be recovered, acknowledging the magnitude of what had been stolen from us both. When the storm of emotion had passed, Ryan straightened, wiping his eyes, with a determination that reminded me painfully of myself. He picked up the envelope of evidence. "We're going to use this," he said firmly. "Not just to defend against Grandma's lawsuit, but to clear your name completely. Dad wants to make amends. Let him start by telling the world what they did to you." The conviction in his voice warmed me even as I worried about the path ahead. Using John's evidence meant public exposure, reopening old wounds, subjecting Ryan to potential backlash from Martha and her social circle. But it also meant vindication. Justice delayed, but not denied. The opportunity to reclaim my reputation and remove the stigma of felony conviction that had shadowed me since my release. The decision we made that day would set in motion events neither of us could fully anticipate, events that would ultimately bring Martha Miller face to face with the consequences of her actions and force a final reckoning for the family that had destroyed and then attempted to erase me. Linda Martinez received John's evidence with professional calm that barely concealed her satisfaction. "This changes everything," she said, reviewing the documents with practiced efficiency. "We're no longer playing defense against Martha's lawsuit. We can counter-sue for malicious prosecution, defamation, alienation of affection between mother and child, the list goes on." The strategy we developed was comprehensive. First, use the evidence to force Martha to withdraw her lawsuit. Second, petition for my conviction to be vacated based on new evidence and John's confession. Third, pursue civil damages against both John and Martha for the harm their actions had caused. John, true to his word, cooperated fully. He provided additional documentation, sat for depositions, and made himself available to Linda and her team whenever needed, whether motivated by genuine remorse or self-preservation. His assistance proved invaluable. Martha's response to John's betrayal was swift and vindictive. She cut him off financially, removed him from the company's board of directors, and launched a smear campaign among family members and business associates, portraying him as an unstable alcoholic whose allegations couldn't be trusted. More concerning was her attempt to pressure Ryan, alternating between tearful pleas about family loyalty and thinly veiled threats about his future inheritance and reputation. "She called my academic advisor," Ryan reported grimly after one particularly aggressive move. "Implied I was having mental health issues that might affect my performance, and suggested the university should monitor me." Such tactics might have worked when Ryan was younger and more vulnerable, but they only strengthened his resolve now. Each manipulation confirmed the pattern of control and deception that had defined his relationship with his grandmother. As our legal counteroffensive gained momentum, we remained vigilant about security. Martha's resources and connections made her dangerous, especially as she grew more desperate. I installed a security system at my home, ensured Ryan's dorm had proper protocols in place, and maintained careful documentation of all contact and threats. The preparation for legal battle consumed us through the fall semester. Ryan balanced his studies with depositions and meetings with attorneys, while I managed my business remotely, focusing primarily on our case. The strain was considerable, but we drew strength from each other and from the support network we had built. Linda with her legal expertise, James with his business acumen, Aunt Louise with her unwavering emotional support. In December, a breakthrough faced with overwhelming evidence and John's willingness to testify against her, Martha's attorneys proposed a settlement. The terms were significant withdrawal of her lawsuit, a substantial financial payment to compensate for my wrongful conviction, and a written statement acknowledging the false allegations against me. Linda presented the offer during a strategy meeting in my living room. "It's a good settlement," she advised. "Clean, comprehensive, and avoids a prolonged court battle that could drain resources and emotional energy." Ryan, who had become increasingly invested in seeing Martha face public consequences, looked dissatisfied. "She gets to avoid admitting everything in open court. She'll still control the narrative among her friends and in the community." "That's often the reality of high-profile settlements," Linda explained gently. "Complete public vindication is rare, especially when the opposing party has resources and connections." I studied the settlement terms carefully. The financial component was generous enough to cover all legal expenses and provide substantial compensation for my years of incarceration. The written statement, while carefully worded to minimize Martha's personal culpability, clearly exonerated me of all wrongdoing. Most importantly, the settlement included provisions for vacating my conviction, with John's sworn statement and the evidence he had provided. The district attorney had indicated willingness to support a petition to clear my record, removing the felony status that had restricted my options since release. I think we should accept, I said finally. This gives us what matters most: legal vindication and freedom from Martha's interference going forward. Ryan looked disappointed but nodded reluctantly. If you think it's the right move, I'll support it. The settlement was finalized in January 2012. Martha signed the documents without meeting with us directly. Her capitulation communicated through layers of attorneys. The statement acknowledging my innocence was released to relevant parties, including Northwestern University, where Ryan had faced questions about his association with me. The petition to vacate my conviction proceeded smoothly with the district attorney's support. In March, a judge reviewed the new evidence, found clear grounds for wrongful conviction, and signed the order clearing my record. After 14 years, I was officially no longer a felon. The vindication brought profound relief, but also renewed grief for all that had been lost years that could never be recovered. Opportunities forever foreclosed. Relationships irreparably damaged. Ryan understood this complex emotional landscape better than anyone, recognizing that legal victory couldn't heal all wounds. "What now?" he asked as we sat together after receiving confirmation of the judge's order. "The lawsuit is gone. Your record is clear. Dad's confessed everything. Where do we go from here?" It was a question I had avoided confronting, focusing so intently on legal battles that I hadn't fully considered what would follow. With my name cleared, my business secure, and my relationship with Ryan healing, what did I want for the future? I said slowly. I want to live fully in the present for a while. I've spent 14 years either trapped in the past or planning for a future that seemed just out of reach. Maybe it's time to simply be. Ryan smiled, the expression softening his features and reminding me of the little boy I had lost. I like that plan. Being present sounds good. Spring brought a sense of renewal as we adjusted to life without legal clouds hanging over us. Ryan excelled in his studies, developed new friendships, and continued working part-time at KM, accommodations during breaks. I expanded the business into new markets, established a foundation to support women re-entering society after incarceration, and began cautiously dating my first attempts at romance since John. The surface of our lives appeared calm, productive, even happy. But beneath that surface, unresolved issues simmered. Despite the settlement and legal vindication, Martha had never personally acknowledged her actions or apologized for the damage she had caused. Ryan still struggled with anger toward both his father and grandmother, emotions that occasionally erupted during our conversations. And I still carried the invisible scars of prison hypervigilance, difficulty trusting authorities, moments of inexplicable panic in confined spaces. Legal exoneration couldn't erase the psychological impact of 7 years behind bars. In late April, an unexpected invitation forced us to confront these lingering issues. Ryan received an email from his cousin Jessica, John's niece and Martha's granddaughter, announcing her upcoming wedding in June. "She's invited both of us," Ryan said, showing me the message. Specifically by name, she says she hopes the past can be set aside for one special day. I frowned, studying the wording. "That's unusual. Has Jessica reached out to you before about all this?" Ryan shook his head. "We were close as kids, but I haven't spoken to her since everything came out about you. Martha probably made sure of that." He scrolled through the message again. "The wedding's at Grandma's country club. She must know about this invitation." The implications were troubling. After months of legal battles ending in Martha's capitulation, why would she suddenly welcome me into her social territory? The country club represented the heart of her world, the exclusive society where the Miller name carried weight, where appearances mattered above all else. "It could be a genuine olive branch," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. "Or Jessica might be extending the invitation against Martha's wishes." "Or it's a trap," Ryan said bluntly. "A way to embarrass you publicly, to reassert control over the narrative." The possibility seemed all too plausible. Martha had lost the legal battle, but still commanded social influence in our hometown. The wedding provided an opportunity to undermine my vindication, perhaps by orchestrating some public humiliation or confrontation that would reinforce the wretched woman narrative she had cultivated for years. "We don't have to go," I pointed out. "We could send a gift? Make an excuse." Ryan considered this, then shook his head firmly. "No. If we decline, she wins. She gets to tell everyone we were too ashamed to show our faces, that the settlement was just legal maneuvering, not truth." His determination reminded me that the stakes extended beyond my personal vindication. Ryan had publicly aligned himself with me, had defended my innocence to family members who questioned his judgment. His reputation and relationships were also at risk. "If we go," I said carefully, "we need to be prepared for anything. Martha won't make this easy." "Then we prepare," Ryan replied simply. "Thoroughly." Over the following weeks, we developed what Ryan jokingly called Operation Wedding Crasher, a comprehensive strategy for attending Jessica's wedding with dignity and protection against Martha's potential machinations. First, we gathered intelligence. Through social media and conversations with sympathetic family members, we identified likely attendees, seating arrangements, and the overall schedule of events. Jessica, whether intentionally or not, provided additional information in her communications with Ryan, mentioning details about the ceremony and reception. Next, we prepared logistically. I booked rooms at a hotel different from where most out-of-town guests would stay, arranged for a private car service instead of using the wedding shuttle, and ensured we had an independent exit strategy if things became uncomfortable. Most importantly, we prepared psychologically. Linda helped us role-play potential scenarios, Martha's cutting remarks, John's awkward attempts at reconciliation, curious or hostile questions from other guests. We practiced responses that were dignified but not confrontational, firm but not defensive. "The key," Linda advised, "is to remember you have nothing to prove. Your innocence is established legally. You're attending as Ryan's mother and Jessica's guest, not as someone seeking approval or forgiveness." As the wedding approached, we made one final, significant decision. Rather than entering the event cautiously or attempting to blend in, we would arrive with quiet confidence that left no doubt about my position or our relationship. I selected an elegant navy suit that projected professional success without ostentation. Ryan would wear a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that complemented mine without matching too obviously. We would arrive together, present a united front, and conduct ourselves with the assurance of people who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. "If she wants to make a scene," Ryan said grimly, "she'll have to do it openly, in front of everyone. No more manipulating from the shadows." The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm, perfect June weather that seemed incongruous with my simmering anxiety. As I dressed in my hotel room, applying makeup with particular care, I found myself thinking of all the family events I had missed during Ryan's childhood birthdays, holidays, graduations. This wedding represented my first re-entry into the social world that had continued without me, the community that had accepted Martha's version of events for 14 years. Ryan knocked on my door at precisely 1 o'clock, looking handsome and grown up in his suit, his expression a mix of determination and concern. "Ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath, smoothing my jacket. "As ready as I'll ever be." The drive to the country club passed in tense silence. The familiar landscape of my hometown scrolled past the car windows, streets unchanged yet different, landmarks both comforting and alienating. I had been a ghost here for 14 years, existing only in whispers and cautionary tales. Today I would materialize, forcing acknowledgement of my continued existence, my vindication, my relationship with my son. The country club entrance was decorated with flowers and wedding signage, elegant cars lining the circular drive as guests arrived. Our driver pulled up precisely on time, and Ryan exited first, coming around to open my door with formal courtesy. As I stepped out, I felt eyes turning toward us, recognition, surprise, speculation rippling through the gathered guests. The whispers began immediately, barely disguised behind hands and programs. Ryan offered his arm, and I took it gratefully, drawing strength from his steady presence. Together we walked toward the entrance, heads high, pace unhurried. I caught fragments of murmured conversations. "Is that Karen Miller? I thought she was in prison." "That's Ryan with her. Martha will have a fit." I heard the whole case was overturned. At the entrance, a young woman in a bridesmaid's dress consulted the guest list, her eyes widening as she registered our names. "Oh, yes, Ms. Miller and Mr. Miller. You're seated on the bride's side, row 5. We thanked her and moved into the ceremony space, an outdoor garden area with white chairs arranged in neat rows, a flower-covered archway at the front. Guests were already filling the seats, conversations faltering as they noticed our arrival. As we made our way to our assigned row, I spotted John standing near the front, speaking with his brother. He saw us and froze mid-sentence, his expression cycling through shock, apprehension, and something like resignation. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement, but made no move to approach. We had almost reached our seats when I felt the atmosphere shift, a collective intake of breath, a subtle realignment of attention. Martha Miller had entered the garden from a side path, resplendent in an expensive pale blue dress, a matching hat perched on her immaculately styled silver hair. She was speaking with another older woman, gesturing emphatically, unaware of our presence. Then someone whispered in her ear. Her head snapped up, gaze locking onto us with laser precision. For a moment, time seemed suspended as our eyes met across the garden. The woman who had orchestrated my destruction, who had poisoned my child against me, who had nearly succeeded in erasing me completely. Martha's expression hardened, lips pressing into a thin line. Then, with remarkable control, she smoothed her features into a social mask, nodded curtly in our direction, and turned back to her conversation as if we were merely distant acquaintances, not worth further acknowledgement. The dismissal was deliberate, calculated to minimize our significance. Had I been alone, it might have landed as intended, reducing me once again to an inconvenient footnote in the Miller family story. But Ryan's warm hand on mine as we took our seats reminded me that I was not alone. Not anymore. The ceremony proceeded with traditional elegance, Jessica looking radiant in her gown, her groom beaming with happiness, the familiar rituals of vows and rings unfolding in the June sunshine. Throughout, I felt Martha's periodic glances from her front row seat, assessing, calculating, planning her next move. When the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the reception area, Ryan kept me close, his body language protective without being obvious. We joined the receiving line to congratulate Jessica and her new husband, bracing for potential awkwardness. Jessica surprised me with her warmth. "Karen, I'm so glad you came," she said, clasping my hand in both of hers. "Ryan's told me so much about your reconciliation. It's wonderful you're back in his life." Her sincerity seemed genuine, her invitation perhaps not the trap we had suspected. "Thank you for including me," I replied. "Your ceremony was beautiful." Her new husband, Michael, shook my hand firmly. "Jessica's been hoping you'd come. She's always believed there was more to the story than what the family said." This revelation that not everyone in the Miller circle had accepted Martha's narrative unquestioningly was both comforting and painful. How many others might have offered support had they known the truth? The reception was held in the club's grand ballroom, tables arranged around a dance floor, flowers and candles creating an atmosphere of romantic celebration. Our table assignment placed us with distant relatives and friends of the bride, strategically separated from the immediate family. Martha's influence was evident in the arrangement, designed to acknowledge our presence while minimizing our interaction with her inner circle. Ryan and I maintained our dignity through dinner, making polite conversation with our table mates, some of whom cautiously asked about my business in Chicago or Ryan's studies. If they were curious about our estrangement and reconciliation, they kept such questions to themselves, following the unspoken rules of polite society that Martha had always championed. After the meal, as dancing began and guests circulated more freely, John approached our table. He looked uncomfortable but determined, maintaining a respectful distance as he addressed us. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low. "It means a lot to Jessica." He hesitated, then added, "And to me?" Ryan's response was cool but not hostile. "We're here for Jessica, that's all." John nodded, accepting the boundary. "Of course." He glanced at me, guilt shadowing his features. "Karen, you look well. I'm glad things are better for you now." The inadequacy of the statement hung between us. Better after 14 years of destruction and rebuilding, after prison and alienation and struggle. But I recognized the attempt, however feeble, at acknowledgement. "Thank you, John," I replied simply. "Congratulations on your niece's marriage." He lingered awkwardly, perhaps hoping for more, then retreated with a nod when nothing further was offered. As the evening progressed, I began to relax marginally. Perhaps Martha had decided that public confrontation was beneath her dignity, that ignoring us was the better strategy for maintaining her social position. We had survived dinner, congratulated the couple, even exchanged brief pleasantries with extended family members. The worst seemed to be over. Then, during a lull in the music, Martha made her move. She approached our table with deliberate grace, champagne flute in hand, her social smile firmly in place. "Ryan, darling," she said, ignoring me completely. "Come dance with your grandmother. The band is playing our song." Our song. The phrase highlighted the relationship she had cultivated with my son in my absence, the traditions and memories she had created while I languished in prison. It was a subtle reminder of her 14-year advantage, of bonds forged while I was erased. Ryan glanced at me, concern in his eyes. I nodded slightly, encouraging him to handle the situation as he saw fit. This was his grandmother. However manipulative and destructive she had been, the choice to engage or withdraw was his alone. "I think I'll sit this one out, Grandma," he said evenly. "But thank you." Martha's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Don't be silly. You've always danced with me at family weddings." She reached for his arm. "Come now. The song's already started." Ryan gently but firmly moved his arm beyond her reach. "Not tonight." The rejection was clear, public, and unmistakable. Martha's composure slipped for just an instant, a flash of fury crossing her features before she recovered. "Very well," she said, her voice tight. "Perhaps another time." She turned to leave, then paused, finally acknowledging me directly. "Karen, how interesting that you've chosen to attend. Not everyone would have the audacity to show their face after everything that's happened." The calculated insult hung in the air between us. Around the table, conversations faltered as guests pretended not to listen while absorbing every word. I met her gaze steadily. "Audacity is an interesting choice of word. Martha, I prefer to think of it as justice. Long delayed, but finally served." Her smile turned brittle. "Justice is a matter of perspective, isn't it? Legal maneuvering can produce all sorts of outcomes, but those who know the truth aren't so easily fooled." "On that point, we agree completely," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Those who know the truth aren't fooled. Not anymore." She leaned closer, voice dropping to ensure only our table could hear. "You think you've won, don't you? That piece of paper clearing your name? My son's pathetic confession. Ryan's temporary loyalty, you think that makes you one of us. I have never wanted to be one of you, Martha," I said quietly. "I only wanted what was rightfully mine, my freedom, my reputation, and my relationship with my son." "He will always be a Miller," she hissed. "No matter what lies you filled his head with. Blood tells, Karen, and yours was never good enough." Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough, Grandma. You've said more than enough." Martha straightened, surprise flashing across her face at his intervention. She had clearly expected him to remain silent, to observe the social niceties she had ingrained in him since childhood. "Ryan," she began, her tone shifting to wounded grandmother. "I'm only trying to protect you from my mother," he interrupted, voice controlled but firm. "The woman you framed for crimes she didn't commit, the woman whose relationship with me you destroyed through lies and manipulation. That's who you're protecting me from." Heads turned at nearby tables, attention drawn by the intensity in Ryan's voice despite his restrained volume. Martha glanced around nervously, acutely aware of potential witnesses to this family drama. "This isn't the time or place for such discussions," she said, attempting to regain control. "We can talk privately later." "No, I think this is exactly the right time and place," Ryan countered. "You've spent 14 years telling your version of events to everyone who would listen. You've painted my mother as a criminal, a negligent parent, a gold digger. You've hidden behind the Miller name and reputation to destroy her life and control mine." Martha's face paled. "Ryan, you're making a scene. Think of Jessica's wedding." "I am thinking of it," he said firmly. "I'm thinking how Jessica specifically invited my mother, knowing the truth about what happened. I'm thinking how other family members have reached out to apologize for believing your lies. I'm thinking how this public event is the perfect place to finally acknowledge that Karen Miller was innocent of everything you accused her of." The confrontation had drawn attention from across the room. Guests were watching openly now, some moving closer to hear better, others pretending fascination with their desserts, while straining to catch every word. Martha must have realized the dangerous territory she had entered. Her carefully maintained narrative was crumbling publicly, her control of the family story slipping away with each word Ryan spoke. "This is most inappropriate," she said, voice brittle. "We'll discuss this at another time. When you're feeling more rational." Ryan shook his head. "There's nothing irrational about telling the truth. Grandma, Dad found the courage to do it. Why can't you?" The mention of John's confession seemed to break something in Martha. Her social mask slipped completely, revealing the rage and fear beneath. "Your father is a weak, pathetic man who couldn't handle the responsibility of carrying on the Miller legacy," she snapped. "Always drinking, always complaining about guilt and conscience. As if those luxuries are affordable when there's a business to protect, a family name to uphold." Her words confirmed everything John had testified, that Martha had been the architect of the fraud, that protecting the business and family name had justified any action, no matter how destructive. "The business was failing because of your financial mismanagement," Ryan said quietly. You and Grandpa had been hiding losses for years before Dad took over. When auditors got close to the truth, you needed a scapegoat, and my mother was convenient an outsider. Someone expendable. Martha's face contorted with fury. She was never good enough for this family, a nobody from nowhere who thought she could step into our world and belong. I did what was necessary to protect what matters. What matters, I interjected, finding my voice. You sent me to prison, Martha. You took me away from my child. You poisoned my son against me. Was that what mattered? The Miller name mattered, she hissed. The legacy mattered. Ryan's future mattered. You were a footnote, a mistake John made that needed to be corrected. Her words hung in the silence that had fallen over our section of the ballroom. Even the most disinterested guests couldn't pretend not to hear now. Martha seemed to realize suddenly how public her confession had become, eyes darting to the surrounding tables where people sat in frozen shock. That is, she stammered, attempting to backtrack. You're twisting my words. I think your words were perfectly clear, Mrs. Miller, came a new voice. We turned to find Jessica standing nearby, her wedding gown gleaming under the ballroom lights, her expression a mix of sadness and resolution. Jessica, darling, this isn't, Martha began. I invited Karen specifically because I wanted to make amends, Jessica interrupted gently. I've suspected for years that the story about her wasn't true. When Ryan finally told me what really happened, I was ashamed that our family had done such a terrible thing. She moved to stand beside us, a symbolic alignment that couldn't be misinterpreted. Grandma, I love you. But what you did to Karen was wrong. What you did to Ryan was wrong. Using my wedding to try to reassert control over this narrative is wrong. Martha seemed to shrink before our eyes, her carefully constructed persona crumbling under the weight of public exposure. For the first time in my memory, she appeared her age, an elderly woman caught in her own web of deception and control. You don't understand, she whispered. I did what had to be done. No, Grandma, Jessica said firmly. You did what was easiest for you, and now you need to make it right. Martha looked around at the watching guests, at her granddaughter's disappointed face, at Ryan's resolute stance beside me. Whatever calculation she was making behind those pale blue eyes, she must have recognized defeat. I think I should retire for the evening, she said stiffly. I'm not feeling well. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her straight back and measured steps a final attempt at dignity. The crowd parted silently to let her pass, the weight of revelations hanging heavy in the air. As Martha disappeared through the ballroom doors, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the gathered guests. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Glances darted our way, but the explosive confrontation had ended as abruptly as it began. Jessica reached for my hand. I'm so sorry that happened at my wedding, but I'm not sorry the truth is finally out. Everyone needs to know what was done to you. I squeezed her hand gratefully. Thank you for inviting us, for believing there was another side to the story. Family should be about love and support, not control and lies, she said simply. Then, with the resilience of a young bride determined to enjoy her wedding day, she smiled. Now I believe the band is playing my favorite song. Ryan, would you and your mother join us on the dance floor? The invitation public, inclusive. Healing was impossible to decline. Ryan offered me his arm, and together we followed Jessica toward the dance floor, where her new husband waited with an encouraging smile. As we moved among other dancing couples, I felt the weight of 14 years of exile begin to lift. Martha's power had been broken, not through legal battles or private confessions, but through her own words spoken in anger, witnessed by the very society whose opinion she valued above all else. Are you okay? Ryan asked softly as we danced, concern evident in his expression. I'm better than okay, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. For the first time since this all began, I feel completely free. And there, on a dance floor surrounded by people who had once accepted the worst version of me without question, I finally reclaimed the last piece of what had been stolen my place in my son's life, acknowledged openly, without shame or secrecy. The wretched woman was gone forever. In her place stood only Karen Miller, mother, businesswoman, survivor finally and completely herself again. The fallout from Martha's public meltdown was swift and comprehensive. By the following morning, the story had spread throughout the extended Miller family and their social circles. Martha's unguarded comments, witnessed by dozens of wedding guests, confirmed what John's legal testimony had already established, that I had been deliberately framed for crimes committed by others to protect the Miller family business and reputation. Martha retreated to her home immediately after leaving the wedding, refusing all visitors and phone calls, even her closest friends. Women who had supported her narrative about me for years found their calls going unanswered. The social isolation was perhaps the cruelest punishment for a woman who had built her identity around her standing in the community. John called Ryan the day after the wedding, his voice strained. "Mom's had some kind of collapse," he reported. "The doctor says it's physical exhaustion combined with extreme stress, but I think it's the public exposure. She's never had to face consequences before." Ryan received the news with complicated emotions, concern mixed with a sense of justice finally served. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, the decent, compassionate young man I had raised still evident despite everything Martha had done. "Physically, yes," John replied, "but I don't think she'll ever be the same socially. The calls started coming in last night, board positions being reconsidered, charity committee seats suddenly needing reorganization. The community she's ruled for decades is turning its back on her." The poetic justice wasn't lost on any of us. Martha had used social exclusion and whispered rumors to destroy my reputation 14 years earlier. Now those same weapons were being deployed against her, with the crucial difference that her downfall was based on truth, not fabrication. For my part, I took no pleasure in Martha's suffering. The vindication was necessary, the public acknowledgement of my innocence healing, but watching another human being's life collapse held no satisfaction. Perhaps prison had taught me too much about the hollowness of revenge. Or perhaps I simply recognized that no amount of punishment could restore what had been taken from me. In the weeks following the wedding, Ryan and I settled into a new phase of our relationship. The external threats had been neutralized, the legal battles won, the truth publicly established. Now we faced the quieter, more personal challenge of building a mother-son bond between adults who had missed 14 crucial years together. Ryan decided to spend the summer with me in Chicago, working full-time at KM, accommodations while taking an online course to stay on track with his degree. The daily proximity allowed us to develop routines and rituals that gradually felt natural rather than forced morning coffee on the back porch, discussing business strategies over dinner, weekend explorations of Chicago neighborhoods. "It's strange," Ryan observed one evening as we walked along the lakefront. "Sometimes I forget that we haven't always been like this. Then something will remind me of all the years in between, and it hits me all over again." I understood exactly what he meant. Our connection had developed its own rhythm, comfortable and intuitive, making the lost years seem simultaneously distant and painfully immediate. "I think that's how it will always be for us," I replied. "We can't pretend those years didn't happen. They shaped both of us, but we can build something new that acknowledges the past without being defined by it." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that a lot, about how to move forward without forgetting, but also without letting it consume everything." "And what have you concluded?" I asked. "That maybe the best revenge, if that's even the right word, is to live well, to build something positive from everything that happened." His insight struck me as both wise beyond his years and perfectly aligned with conclusions I had reached during my own darkest moments. "That's exactly right," I agreed. "Living well is the only revenge worth pursuing." John continued to seek reconciliation with Ryan throughout that summer, calling regularly and suggesting meetings. Ryan approached these overtures cautiously, agreeing to occasional lunches but maintaining emotional distance. "I don't hate him," Ryan explained after returning from one such meeting. "I just don't know how to have a normal father-son relationship with someone who did what he did. Maybe someday, but not yet." I encouraged Ryan to keep communication open while establishing healthy boundaries. "Your relationship with your father is separate from what happened to me," I told him. "You get to decide what that relationship looks like based on what's best for you, not based on loyalty to me or obligation to him." My own interaction with John remained minimal and primarily focused on practical matters related to Ryan. We had reached a fragile peace, not friendship, certainly not reconciliation, but a mutual acknowledgement that our shared love for our son required civil cooperation. Martha's situation deteriorated further as summer progressed. The Miller Transport Company, already struggling before the wedding incident, faced a cascade of problems: creditors demanding immediate payment, business partners withdrawing from contracts, banking relationships under review. Without Martha's social connections to smooth over financial irregularities, the business structure began to collapse. In August, John called with news that the company had filed for bankruptcy protection and was likely to be sold to a competitor. It's the end of the Miller legacy, he said, his voice a mix of relief and grief. Everything my grandfather built, everything my parents protected at all costs, gone. The irony was inescapable. The business Martha had sacrificed me to save, had lied and manipulated to protect, had ultimately fallen anyway. All the damage she had caused to me, to Ryan, to our family, had been for nothing. News of the bankruptcy filing reached the business community in Chicago, where my success with K-Man accommodations had earned respect and recognition. Several colleagues commented on the contrast my rise from wrongful conviction to successful entrepreneur juxtaposed against the Millers' fall from prominence. You must feel vindicated, one business associate remarked during a Chamber of Commerce event, watching their empire crumble after what they did to you. I considered the comment carefully before responding. What I feel is gratitude for the opportunity to rebuild my life and reconnection with my son. The Millers' business troubles bring me no joy. That's very gracious of you, she replied, clearly surprised by my lack of gloating. Not gracious, I corrected gently. Practical. Holding on to bitterness requires energy I'd rather invest elsewhere. As summer drew to a close and Ryan prepared for his junior year at Northwestern, we discussed whether he should reconnect with Martha. He hadn't spoken to his grandmother since the wedding confrontation, maintaining distance while she dealt with health issues and business collapse. Part of me thinks I should check on her, Ryan admitted. Regardless of what she did, she raised me for 14 years, but another part feels like any contact would suggest forgiveness I'm not ready to offer. Compassion doesn't require forgiveness, I suggested. You can acknowledge someone's humanity, even check on their well-being, without condoning their actions. Ryan considered this distinction carefully. Maybe I'll send a card. Let her know I'm thinking about her without promising more than I can deliver. His maturity in navigating these complex family dynamics impressed me deeply. The boy who had been raised on lies had grown into a young man committed to truth and integrity, even when truth was painful and integrity came at a personal cost. In September, as Ryan moved back into campus housing for fall semester, Martha reached out directly for the first time since the wedding. She sent a handwritten letter to my Chicago address. How she obtained it remained unclear, with a simple request for a private meeting. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, she wrote in shaky but still elegant script. But there are things that need to be said between us. For Ryan's sake, if not for our own. I shared the letter with Ryan, unwilling to meet with Martha without his knowledge or consent. He read it thoughtfully, expression unreadable. Do you want to see her? He asked. I'm not sure, I admitted. Part of me thinks closure requires one final conversation. Another part wonders if any good can come from it. Ryan handed the letter back to me. I think you should go, but not alone. I'll come with you. You don't have to do that, I protested. This is between Martha and me. Nothing in this family has ever been just between two people. He pointed out with surprising insight. Everything that happened affected all of us. Maybe healing requires all of us too. We arranged to meet Martha at a neutral location, a private room at a restaurant halfway between Chicago and our hometown. Ryan insisted on these conditions to ensure the meeting wouldn't devolve into another attempt at manipulation or control. On a crisp October afternoon, we arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, both tense with anticipation. The private room was small but comfortable, with a round table that eliminated any head position where Martha might assert dominance. She arrived precisely on time, assisted by a caregiver who helped her to the table before discreetly withdrawing. The Martha Miller who joined us bore little resemblance to the formidable matriarch who had orchestrated my destruction, or even the elegant grandmother at Jessica's wedding months earlier. This Martha was diminished, physically smaller somehow. Her designer clothing hanging loosely on her frame, her once perfect hair simply styled without its former precision. Only her eyes retained their sharpness, taking in every detail of our appearance and the room's arrangement. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. Both of you. Ryan nodded stiffly. I managed a neutral, hello Martha, as we took our seats. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when a server entered with water and departed again. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass, the diamond rings she'd always worn now loose on her thin fingers. I won't waste time with small talk, she finally said. My health is failing. The doctors say it could be months or weeks, they can't be certain. Before I go, there are things that need to be said. Ryan shifted in his seat, his expression guarded but attentive. I maintained my composure, waiting for whatever revelations or justifications Martha felt compelled to offer. What I did was wrong, she stated flatly, surprising me with her directness. Not just legally or ethically wrong, but fundamentally, humanly wrong. I destroyed your life. Karen, I separated a mother from her child. I poisoned my grandson against you with deliberate lies. The admission, spoken plainly without qualification or excuse, momentarily robbed me of response. After 14 years of denial and deflection, Martha's sudden candor was disorienting. Why? Ryan asked, his voice tight with emotion. Why did you do it? Martha's gaze shifted to her grandson, sorrow evident in her expression. The simple answer is fear. Fear of losing the business my husband had built. Fear of social disgrace. Fear of failure. She paused, then added more quietly. And fear of losing control of you. Ryan. Me. Ryan's surprise was evident. I was just a child. You were the Miller heir, Martha corrected. The future of the family. And from the moment you were born, Karen had a bond with you that I envied. You looked at her with love I never saw in my own son's eyes. The revelation of jealousy as a motivating factor was both pathetic and illuminating. Martha hadn't just wanted to protect the business. She had wanted to secure her relationship with Ryan without competition from a mother whose natural connection she couldn't match. So you sent me to prison, I said, the words still painful to speak after all this time. You turned my child against me. You erased me from his life. All because you were jealous of a mother's love for her son. Martha didn't flinch from the accusation. Yes, the business problems were real. We were facing serious financial trouble. But using you as the scapegoat, that was a choice driven by something uglier than financial necessity. Her honesty, however belated, carried a certain dignity. After years of manipulation and deception, Martha was finally offering the unvarnished truth, perhaps the only meaningful gift she had left to give. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. I'm not here to ask for that. I'm here because Ryan deserves to know the full truth, and because you, Karen, deserve to hear me acknowledge what I did. Ryan's expression remained carefully controlled, but I could see the emotions churning beneath the surface: anger, grief, confusion, even a reluctant appreciation for his grandmother's eventual honesty. There's one other matter, Martha said, reaching into her handbag with trembling hands. She withdrew a legal envelope and placed it on the table. This is a formal retraction of every statement I ever made about Karen's guilt, along with a detailed confession of my own role in framing her. It's been notarized and filed with the court that handled her original case. There's also a financial settlement. I don't want your money, I interrupted, the suggestion rekindling old anger. I understand, Martha replied calmly. But restitution isn't optional. The funds have been placed in a trust that will activate upon my death. You can donate it to charity if you wish, but I needed to make this right in every way possible. The comprehensiveness of her atonement was unexpected. Martha had apparently considered every aspect of the damage she had caused and attempted to address each component: legal, financial, and personal. Why now? Ryan asked, breaking his silence. You had 14 years to tell the truth. Why wait until you're dying? Martha's composed facade cracked slightly, regret flickering across her features. Cowardice, she admitted. The same weakness that led me to frame Karen rather than face the consequences of the financial fraud. I've spent my life avoiding difficult truths. Ryan, it's not a legacy I'm proud to leave you. Her candor seemed to affect Ryan more deeply than any justification could have. He nodded slowly, processing her words with the thoughtful consideration I'd come to recognize as characteristic of his approach to complex emotional situations. I appreciate your honesty now, he finally said. I wish it had come sooner. But I understand why it didn't. Martha's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in all our years of knowing each other. You are a better person than I raised you to be. Ryan, that credit belongs to the values your mother instilled before we took her away, and to your own innate goodness that survived despite our influence. The acknowledgement of Ryan's character and its source represented perhaps the most meaningful concession Martha could make. By attributing his positive qualities to me and to himself, she was surrendering her claim to have shaped him beneficially. Our conversation continued for another hour, covering difficult but necessary ground. Martha provided details about the original financial fraud, her manipulation of John, her systematic campaign to erase me from Ryan's consciousness. Each revelation was painful but clarifying, filling gaps in our understanding of how everything had unfolded. When Martha finally signaled that she was tiring and needed to leave, Ryan rose to help her stand. The gesture wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was human decency extended to someone who had shown precious little of it herself. "Goodbye, Ryan," Martha said, her hand lingering on his arm. "I won't ask to see you again. That choice belongs to you now, as it always should have." She turned to me, our eyes meeting directly. "Karen, I can't undo what I did to you. No apology can restore those years. But know that I die understanding the magnitude of my wrongdoing, and regretting it completely." I nodded, unable to offer forgiveness but acknowledging her attempt at amends. "Goodbye, Martha." As her caregiver led her from the room, Ryan and I remained seated, processing the encounter in silence. The Martha Miller who had just left was not the same woman who had orchestrated my destruction 14 years earlier. Whether her transformation stemmed from genuine moral awakening or merely the perspective of impending death was impossible to determine and ultimately irrelevant. "Are you okay?" I asked Ryan, concerned about the emotional impact of the meeting. He considered the question carefully before answering. "I think so. It's strange I've been so angry at her for so long. But seeing her like that, hearing her take responsibility, it doesn't erase what she did, but it changes how I feel about it somehow. That's the difference between justice and revenge," I suggested. "Justice includes accountability and acknowledgement. Revenge requires continued suffering." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "I don't want her to suffer. I just needed her to admit what she did, to stop pretending it was justified. And now she has," I said simply. We left the restaurant together, walking to the car in companionable silence. The meeting with Martha represented a closing chapter, but not the end of our story. The future stretched before us, no longer shadowed by unresolved conflicts or unanswered questions. Martha Miller passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 weeks later. Ryan attended the funeral, standing quietly at the back of the church, paying respects not to the woman who had orchestrated my destruction, but to the grandmother who had, in her final act, chosen truth over pretense. I did not attend. Some distances cannot be bridged, even by death. Instead, I honored Martha's passing in my own way by donating the trust funds she had established to a foundation supporting children separated from parents by incarceration. The money that had once maintained the Miller facade would now help heal families fractured by circumstances similar to our own. John called after the funeral, his voice rough with emotion. "She asked me to tell you something. At the end, she said, 'Tell Karen I was wrong about everything, especially about her not belonging. She was always stronger than any of us.'" The message, Martha's final acknowledgement of the resilience she had tried and failed to break, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but recognition. After 14 years of being painted as the wretched woman, I had been seen, finally, for who I truly was. "Thank you for telling me," I said to John. "I hope you find peace, too." In the months that followed, Ryan and I continued building our relationship, no longer defined by the shadow of Martha's influence or the trauma of our separation. He excelled in his studies, developing particular interest in ethical business practices and corporate governance fields, directly informed by his family history. My business expanded thoughtfully, with Ryan's input shaping new directions and initiatives. KM Accommodations launched a program providing transitional housing for women recently released from prison, offering both accommodation and employment opportunities. The wretched woman, once stripped of everything, now created pathways for others to rebuild their lives. The pain of our 14-year separation never disappeared entirely. On quiet nights, I still grieved for the childhood moments I had missed: Ryan's first day of middle school, his basketball championships, the everyday intimacies of watching a child grow. Those losses remained real and irretrievable. But alongside the grief grew something beautiful, a relationship between a mother and son who had found their way back to each other against overwhelming odds. A relationship built on truth rather than deception, on mutual respect rather than control, on love that had survived 14 years of deliberate erasure. One evening, as Ryan and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset over Chicago's skyline, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if none of it had occurred, if the Millers hadn't framed you? If we'd stayed together as a normal family?" I considered the question carefully, understanding its importance to him. "Sometimes," I admitted. "I imagine the mother I would have been, the person you might have become in different circumstances. Do you think we'd be closer?" he asked. "More like a normal mother and son." "Different, certainly," I replied, "but not necessarily closer. What we have now was earned through fire. Ryan, there's a depth to our relationship precisely because of what we overcame to build it. He nodded slowly, processing this perspective. I think you're right. I just wish. He trailed off, the unfinished thought hanging between us. I know, I said softly. I wish too. But wishing can't change the past. It can only distract us from appreciating the present. Ryan smiled then, the expression transforming his serious face into something younger, lighter. The present is pretty good, he acknowledged. Against all odds. Against all odds indeed. From prison inmate to successful entrepreneur. From erased mother to reconnected parent. From the wretched woman to Karen Miller, whole and free. Martha had once believed she could destroy me completely, could erase me from my child's life and from the narrative of my own existence. She had failed. Not because I was exceptional, but because truth is ultimately stronger than deception. Love more enduring than hate. As darkness fell over Chicago, I sat beside my son, gratitude replacing the bitterness that had sustained me through my darkest years. The wretched woman was gone forever. In her place sat simply a mother, appreciating the miracle of her son's presence and the future they would build together. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below.